They say family is everything. But what happens when your family treats you like nothing? I stood there face burning as my 12-year-old nephew slapped me. Once, twice, 20 times in front of 30 relatives at his award ceremony. My crime accidentally spilling soda on his shoes. I waited for anyone to stop him. My parents laughed. My sister filmed it on her phone. 20 family members watched in silence. When he finally stopped, my mother said the words that shattered me. Kimgo apologized to the boy? For 35 years, I'd been invisible to them. The backup plan, the ATM, the one who didn't matter. I'd sacrificed everything, my money, my dignity, my voice, to keep this family together. But they made one critical mistake. They never asked where their mortgage money came from. So I smiled at them, a smile that made everyone uncomfortable, and said 5 words that changed everything. Check your mail this week. What they found made their faces turn ghostly white, because I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one who owned everything they thought was theirs, and I was done being invisible. My name is Kimberly Jenkins. I'm 35 years old and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Chicago. On paper, my life looks perfectly fine, stable job, decent apartment, no debt. But if you looked closer, you'd see something else entirely. A woman who's spent her whole life trying to be seen by people who look right through her. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the north side, the kind of place where the radiator clanks at night and the neighbours are close enough to hear through the walls, but never close enough to know your name. My furniture is second-hand, but comfortable. My kitchen table seats too, though I've never had anyone over for dinner. My walls are mostly bare except for a few landscape prints I bought at Target, and one framed photograph that sits on my desk. My grandmother smiling at the camera with her arm around 8-year-old me. Every morning, I wake up at 6:30, make coffee in my cheap Mr. Coffee machine, and get dressed in one of my 5 work blazers. I'm good at my job. Really good, actually. Last year, I helped 3 clients restructure their portfolios and saved them a combined $2 million. My boss praised me in an email. My co-workers nodded politely at the team meeting. But when I called my parents to share the news, my mother said, "That's nice, dear," and immediately changed the subject to talk about my sister, Sarah's latest freelance photography project. That's been my whole life, really, existing in the background while everyone else takes centre stage. My family lives 40 minutes away in the suburbs in the house I grew up in, the house with the blue shutters and the oak tree in the front yard where Sarah and I used to climb as kids, except I was always the one holding the ladder while she reached for the highest branches. My parents still live there with my sister and her 12-year-old son, Tyler. Sarah moved back in 5 years ago after her divorce, and somehow that temporary arrangement became permanent. Not that anyone asked my opinion. They don't ask my opinion about much. I've learned to accept that I'm the invisible daughter, the reliable one, the one who doesn't make waves or demand attention. When Sarah needs money for Tyler's school supplies, I Venmo her $300 without asking questions. When my father's car needed a new transmission last year, I paid the $1,500 bill because I knew they were tight on cash. When my mother mentioned they were worried about property taxes, I quietly set up an automatic monthly transfer to help with the mortgage. They never say thank you. They never acknowledge it. I think they've convinced themselves it's just what I do, like, it's my purpose in the family to be the safety net nobody has to think about. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I look at my grandmother's photo and remember her voice. She died when I was 15, and I still miss her every single day. She was the only person who ever really saw me. The only one who noticed when I won the 8th grade math competition, or when I made the honour roll, or when I sat alone at my own 16th birthday party, because everyone was too busy fussing over Sarah's college acceptance letter. "Don't let people walk all over you, child," she told me a week before she died, holding my hand in her hospital bed. "You're stronger than you think. Don't forget that." I haven't followed her advice. I've spent 20 years being a doormat, convincing myself that keeping the peace is the same thing as keeping a family. My phone buzzed on my desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. A text from my mother, family dinner this weekend. You're coming, right? We need to talk about something important. I stared at those words for a long moment, something cold settling in my stomach. In my family, something important never meant good news for me. It meant they needed something. It always did. I typed back, I'll be there. And I had no idea that this dinner would be the last time I'd let them treat me like I didn't matter. That evening, I stopped by Margaret's apartment on my way back from the grocery store. Margaret Holloway lived 2 doors down from me, and over the past 5 years, she'd become something between a neighbour and the grandmother figure I'd lost. She was 78, sharp as a tack, and had a way of seeing straight through the pleasant masks people wore. I found her sitting in her usual spot by the window, working on a crossword puzzle with reading glasses perched on her nose. Her apartment was warm and cluttered in the best way, filled with photos of a life fully lived and books stacked on every available surface. "Kimberly," she said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Come in, sweetheart. I just made tea." I should have known better than to think I could hide anything from her. Margaret had watched me make countless trips to my car, loaded down with bags and boxes over the years, heading off to visit my family. She'd seen me return hours later, looking exhausted and somehow smaller than when I'd left. We sat at her small kitchen table, steam rising from our cups. Margaret added 2 sugars to hers, stirring slowly while studying my face in that unnerving way she had. "You're going to see them again this weekend," she said. It wasn't a question. "Family dinner," I confirmed, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "They said they need to talk about something important." Margaret set down her spoon with a soft clink. "Kimberly, I've known you for 5 years now. I've watched you carry groceries to that family more times than I can count. I've seen you load up your car with gifts and supplies, driving out there every few weeks like you're running a charity service." I felt my cheeks flush. "They're my family, Margaret. They need help sometimes." "Help?" she repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, when does kindness become self-destruction?" The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to laugh it off to change the subject, but something in her expression stopped me. "I lost my daughter 30 years ago." Margaret continued, her voice quieter now. "Emily. She was married to a man who belittled her, controlled her money, isolated her from friends. And you know what? I told her every time she came to me with bruises she tried to hide, I said, keep the family together at all costs. Marriage is work. Don't give up." I'd heard piece of this story before, but never quite like this. I prioritized an institution over my daughter's safety because that's what I'd been taught. That's what I believed. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. Family is everything. Margaret's eyes glistened. She died at 34, and I have to live every single day knowing my advice helped kill her. "Margaret," I whispered, but she held up her hand. "You're not in physical danger, I know that. But I've watched you for 5 years, and I see the same pattern. You've been teaching them how to treat you, Kimberly. Every time you show up with your wallet open and your needs invisible, you're giving them permission to keep using you." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her she didn't understand that my family wasn't like that they loved me in their own way. But the words stuck in my throat because somewhere deep down I knew she was right. "They're my family," I said weakly, the only defense I had left. "Are they?" Margaret asked. "Because family should see you, sweetheart. They should value you. They should at least remember to say thank you." I left Margaret's apartment 20 minutes later, with her words echoing in my head like a bell I couldn't unring. Back in my own space, I tried to distract myself with dinner preparation, with television, with anything that would quiet the uncomfortable questions she'd planted in my mind. But at 10 o'clock, unable to sleep, I found myself pulling an old cardboard box from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were remnants of my childhood school papers, photos, and buried beneath it all my diary from high school. The pink cover was faded, and the lock had broken years ago. I opened it randomly, and the universe had a cruel sense of humour, because the page I landed on was dated exactly 19 years ago, my 16th birthday. Today was my 16th birthday. Read my teenage handwriting, the letters pressed hard into the paper, like I'd been trying to brand the words into existence. Mum made a cake, but it had Sarah's name on it too. She's leaving for college in 2 weeks, and they said it would save money to combine our celebrations. Sarah got 12 presents, I got a card with $20. Dad said they'd spent so much on Sarah's dorm supplies that they couldn't do much for me this year, but there would be other birthdays. Nobody sang happy birthday with my name. When I tried to cut the cake, Sarah said she should cut it, since she's the one leaving for college, and everyone agreed. I ate my piece in the kitchen by myself and pretended I didn't care. I flipped through more pages, and the pattern was everywhere. Every accomplishment diminished, every hurt dismissed, every moment I tried to matter met with the message that I didn't. Made on a roll today. Told Mum at dinner. She said, "That's nice," and asked Sarah about her art project for 10 minutes. Won the regional math competition. Dad said he couldn't come because he had to drive Sarah to her dance audition. Senior prom tonight. Sarah borrowed my saved birthday money for her college textbooks. Mum said I should be happy to help my sister succeed. I closed the diary and sat there on my bedroom floor, 35 years old, and finally seeing clearly what my 16-year-old self had known but couldn't articulate. I'd been invisible my entire life, not because I wasn't enough, but because they'd decided long ago that I didn't matter as much. My plane ticket to visit them sat on my nightstand printed and ready. The family dinner was in 3 days. 3 days until whatever important thing they needed to tell me, which probably meant whatever important thing they needed from me. I picked up the ticket and stared at it for a long moment, Margaret's voice still echoing in my mind. When does kindness become self-destruction? Maybe this time will be different, I whispered to the empty room, knowing even as I said it that I was lying to myself. Maybe they finally see me. But somewhere deeper, in a place I wasn't quite ready to acknowledge, a different voice whispered back, "And what if they never do? What? Then?" 3 days later, I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home with those whispered questions still haunting me. The blue shutters needed painting. The oak tree had grown thicker. Everything looked exactly the same as it had for 30 years, frozen in time, like a museum exhibit of the life I'd never quite fit into. I sat in my car for a moment before going in, watching through the front window as my family moved around inside. I could see my mother setting the table, my father adjusting something on the wall, and Sarah walking past with her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. Even from here, even through glass and distance, I could see the energy that radiated from her, the way she commanded space and attention without even trying. I grabbed the bags from my passenger seat. Wine for dinner, a new video game for Tyler that he'd mentioned wanting in a text 3 weeks ago. A scented candle for my mother, because she'd complained about the kitchen smelling like garbage disposal. Always bringing gifts, always trying to buy my way into relevance. The moment I walked through the door, I was struck by how much hadn't changed, and how much had. The house still smelled like my mother's lavender potpourri, mixed with whatever she was cooking. Family photos still lined the hallway, and I played a familiar game as I walked past them, counting how many featured Sarah versus how many featured me. 14-3. I'd stopped being surprised by the ratio years ago. "Kim, you made it." My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She gave me a quick hug that felt more like a formality than affection. "Sarah's been so excited to see you. She has wonderful news to share." Of course she did. There was always wonderful news about Sarah. I found my sister in the living room, and I had to admit she looked good. Really good. Her hair was freshly highlighted, the kind of expensive balayage that cost $300 minimum. She wore designer jeans I recognised from a Nordstrom window display paired with a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her nails were professionally manicured. Her skin glowed with the kind of luminescence that comes from regular facials, and her leather bag, sitting on the couch, bore a logo I knew cost upward of $2,000. "Kimberly," she air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume expensive and cloying. "You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" There it was, 5 seconds in, and already I was inadequate. "Work's been busy," I said, which was true, but also beside the point. "Oh, I know exactly what you mean. My photography business has absolutely exploded. I just booked 3 weddings for next summer, and I'm in talks with a local magazine about a regular column. Plus, I'm developing an online course about personal branding for creatives. The income potential is just insane." I nodded, making appropriate impressed sounds, but something nagged at me. Sarah had been talking about her booming photography business for 5 years now, yet I'd never actually seen her post any client work. Her Instagram was full of selfies and inspirational quotes, but where were the wedding photos, the magazine features, the evidence of this supposedly thriving career? And those jeans alone cost more than most freelance photographers made in a week. My nephew Tyler was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone with the glazed expression of someone who'd been staring at a screen for hours. He was 12 now, all awkward limbs and attitude, wearing expensive sneakers that I knew cost $200 because Sarah had posted about them online with the caption, "Only the best for my baby." "Hey, Tyler," I said warmly, hoping for some small connection with the kid I'd bought birthday presents for every year of his life. He didn't even look up. His thumb kept scrolling, his face bathed in blue light. "Tyler, your aunt is talking to you," Sarah said, but her tone was indulgent rather than corrective, like his rudeness was somehow charming. "Hey," he muttered, still not making eye contact. I stood there for an awkward moment, holding my bags, feeling exactly as invisible as I had at 16. Sarah didn't seem to notice or care. She'd already turned back to her phone, typing rapidly with her perfect manicured nails. At dinner, the family dynamics played out like a script we'd all memorized decades ago. My father asked Sarah about her business, and she launched into a 20-minute monologue about client demands and creative vision. My mother hung on every word, asking follow-up questions, praising her entrepreneurial spirit. Tyler interrupted 4 times to demand things more: bread, different water, his tablet from the other room, and each time either Sarah or my mother jumped up to fulfill his requests like he was royalty. When my father finally turned to me and asked, "So, Kim, how's work?" I'd barely gotten through 2 sentences about a complex portfolio restructuring before Sarah cut in with another story about a difficult bride she'd managed to charm. Nobody asked me to finish. Nobody noticed I'd stopped talking. "You know, Kim," my mother said during a lull, passing the potatoes without looking at me, "you really should understand what your sister is going through. Raising a child alone, building a business from scratch, it's so much more stressful than your situation. You don't have those kinds of pressures." I felt the familiar sting, the automatic diminishment of my life and work. I wanted to say that I'd saved a client $400,000 last month. I wanted to mention that I was managing a portfolio worth $8 million. I wanted to ask why my corporate success counted less than Sarah's supposed freelance work. Instead, I said, "You're right, it must be hard." Later, while clearing plates, I overheard voices from the kitchen. I'd gone to the hallway bathroom, and on my way back, I heard my Aunt Carol talking to my mother in low tones that carried through the doorway. "I still can't believe how well everything worked out after your mother passed," Aunt Carol was saying. "That inheritance really helped Sarah get her start, didn't it? Starting a business from scratch is expensive." My hand froze on the wall. Inheritance. "Oh, yes," my mother replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Mother was so generous. Sarah was able to invest in all her equipment and really launch properly. It made such a difference. "And what did Kimberly do with her portion?" Aunt Carol asked. There was a pause, just a beat too long before my mother said, "Oh, you know Kim, she's always been so practical with money. I'm sure she saved it." My heart pounded in my ears. I'd never received any inheritance notification when my grandmother died 15 years ago. I was 20 in college, and I remembered my parents telling me that grandmother had left her small savings to help with the family expenses. There had never been any mention of money specifically for me. I pressed myself against the wall, mind racing, when I heard my father's voice join the conversation. "Speaking of expenses," he said, his tone casual in that way that meant he was about to ask for something. "Did anyone talk to Kim about the situation yet?" "Not yet," my mother replied. "We'll bring it up after dessert. Kim will cover the costs, right? She always does." The words hit me like ice water. Whatever this important family discussion was about, it wasn't about them finally seeing me or valuing me. It was about money. It was always about money. I stood in that hallway, invisible as ever, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. When does kindness become self-destruction? Maybe it already had. I didn't have time to process what I'd overheard because suddenly the house was filling with people. Extended family I hadn't seen in months appeared as if summoned, all converging for what I quickly learned was an impromptu celebration of Tyler's achievement at school. He'd received some kind of award, and the way everyone was carrying on, you'd think he'd won a Nobel Prize. My Aunt Carol swept past me with a platter of cookies. Uncle Robert brought in a case of beer from his truck. My mother's sister Linda arrived with balloons. Within 20 minutes, the quiet family dinner had transformed into a party for 20-plus people, all gathered to celebrate my nephew's participation trophy for showing up to soccer practice. I found out the details from my cousin Michelle, who pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was opening wine bottles. "Isn't it wonderful?" she gushed. "Tyler got the Most Improved Player award. Sarah's so proud. She posted about it on Facebook this morning, said it proved her parenting philosophy of positive reinforcement really works. Most Improved Player. Improved. The award they gave to kids who hadn't quit despite being terrible at the sport. I'd gotten the same award in 7th grade basketball. Nobody had thrown me a party. But I smiled and nodded and opened more wine because that's what I did. That's who I was in this family. The one who served drinks and stayed in the background and made sure everyone else's celebration went smoothly. In the living room, Tyler held court on the couch, the little gold trophy perched on the coffee table in front of him like an Oscar. Relatives took turns congratulating him, each compliment more effusive than the last. "You're so talented. What dedication. We always knew you were special." He accepted it all with the bored entitlement of someone who'd been told he was exceptional since birth, barely looking up from his phone except to nod when someone handed him a plate of food or a new can of soda. I moved through the party, like a ghost, refilling drinks, taking empty plates to the kitchen, cleaning up spills. Nobody thanked me. Nobody seemed to notice I was doing it. I might as well have been hired help. Sarah stood in the centre of the room, radiant in her expensive clothes, soaking up the reflected glory of her son's mediocre achievement. "It's been such a journey, Joe," she was saying to a cluster of aunts. "The coaches told me Tyler had real potential, and I just knew I had to nurture that. Single motherhood isn't easy, but moments like this make it all worthwhile." The aunts murmured sympathetic approval. Someone touched her arm supportively. Someone else said, "You're doing such an amazing job." I was refilling Tyler's soda when it happened. I'd done it 100 times that evening, moving quietly around the furniture with a 2-litre bottle of Coke topping off glasses without being asked. Tyler was holding his glass out without looking, still scrolling through his phone with his other hand when he suddenly jerked his arm. The movement was sharp and unexpected. His elbow knocked against my hand and the soda I'd been pouring sloshed over the rim of the glass and splashed onto his feet. It was clearly an accident. Anyone watching would have seen it was his movement that caused the spill. But Tyler erupted, like I'd done it on purpose. "What is wrong with you?" he screamed, jumping up from the couch. The room went silent, all conversation stopping mid-sentence. "You're so clumsy. Do you know how expensive these are?" He thrust his foot toward me, showing off his $200 sneakers now spotted with coke. His face was red with outrage, his voice shrill and accusing. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at us. "Tyler, I'm sorry, it was an accident. I started, but he talked right over me. These are limited edition. You can't just get these anywhere. You'll have to buy me new ones. These are ruined." I stood there with the soda bottle in my hand, napkins clutched in the other, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. My first instinct was to apologize profusely, to make it better, to minimize the disruption I'd caused. That's what I always did. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was Margaret's words still echoing in my head. Maybe it was the overhead conversation about the inheritance. Maybe it was 35 years of being treated like I didn't matter finally reaching critical mass. I looked at Sarah, waiting for her to correct her son's disrespectful outburst. Waiting for her to explain that it was an accident, that he jerked his arm, that speaking to adults that way was unacceptable. She said nothing. She just stood there looking mildly annoyed at the interruption to her moment of glory. I turned to my parents. My father had his hand half raised like he might say something, but my mother beat him to it. "Kimberly," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Be more careful around Tyler. Those shoes are expensive." She turned to my nephew with a soft, indulgent smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. Your Aunt Kim will be more careful." The words hit me like a slap. Not one word about Tyler's behaviour. Not one acknowledgement that it had been an accident. Just automatic blame, automatic assumption that I was at fault, automatic dismissal of my worth compared to a 12-year-old's overpriced sneakers. "Kim," my father added, his tone, that particular mix of disappointment and exasperation I'd heard my entire life. "Apologise to Tyler properly. You know those shoes are important to him." 20 relatives watched in silence. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked away. Not one person spoke up for me. Not one person pointed out that Tyler had caused the spill himself. Not one person suggested that maybe, just maybe, a child shouldn't speak to his aunt that way. I felt something crack inside me, a hairline fracture in the foundation I'd built my entire identity on. The foundation that said family was everything, that keeping the peace mattered most, that being the reliable one, the helpful one, the invisible one, was somehow noble. Tyler stood in front of me with his arms crossed, waiting for his apology like it was his due. Behind him, Sarah moved forward, with a smile on her face that I'd never seen before. It wasn't kind, it wasn't motherly. It was something else entirely. Something challenging, something that said she knew exactly what she was doing. She put her hand on Tyler's shoulder and turned him to face me directly. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment I saw the truth I'd been avoiding for 35 years. She didn't see me as her sister. She saw me as a resource, a bank account, a doormat. "Go ahead, Tyler," Sarah said, her voice sugar-sweet and dripping with false encouragement. "Tell Aunt Kim how disappointed you are in her carelessness." And I stood there frozen, with everyone watching, waiting to see if I would do what I always did. If I would apologise, if I would promise to buy the shoes, if I would shrink myself down to nothing to keep the peace. The crack inside me spread wider. My mouth opened automatically, the apology forming on my lips like muscle memory. "I'm sorry, Tyler, I didn't mean to..." But the words caught in my throat. Something inside me, that cold, hard thing that had been forming since I'd overheard the kitchen conversation, seized up and refused to let the sentence finish. I'd apologised 1,000 times before, 10,000 times, for things that weren't my fault for existing in spaces where I wasn't wanted, for having needs or feelings or the audacity to take up room in my own family. How many times had I said sorry when I shouldn't have? How many times had I bowed my head and accepted blame that belonged to someone else? The silence stretched. Tyler's face shifted from righteous anger to confusion. He wasn't used to waiting for his apologies. They usually came instantly, reflexively, like breathing. Kim, my father's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with warning. Just say sorry so we can move on. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. The family motto. The cardinal rule I'd internalized so deeply it might as well have been tattooed on my soul. Keep the peace. Don't cause disruption. Smooth over conflict by making yourself smaller, quieter, less. My mother nodded vigorously beside him, her face already flushed with embarrassment. Not embarrassment at Tyler's behaviour or Sarah's manipulation. Embarrassment at me. At the disruption I was causing by not immediately complying. I could read her expression as clearly as if she'd spoken aloud. Why does Kim always have to make everything difficult? But I hadn't made anything difficult. I'd been refilling drinks quietly, invisibly the way I always did. Tyler had jerked his arm. The soda had spilled. None of that was my fault. Yet here I stood, expected to apologise, expected to promise to replace $200 sneakers for a child who'd never said thank you for any of the gifts I'd given him over 12 years. Expected to shrink and apologise and disappear. Time seemed to slow down. In those few seconds of silence, 35 years flashed through my mind with brutal clarity. 8 years old, waiting at school for 3 hours because they'd forgotten me. 10 years old, watching Sarah open 12 presents on my birthday while I got a card. 16 years old, eating cake alone in the kitchen while everyone sang Sarah's name. 20 years old, never told about an inheritance my grandmother had left specifically for me. 25 years old, paying for my father's car repair without acknowledgement. 30 years old, watching Sarah move into the family home while I lived alone in a cramped apartment. 35 years old, discovering I'd been funding their mortgage for reasons I still didn't understand. 35 years of being the ATM, the backup plan, the invisible daughter who existed only to serve others' needs. And now they wanted me to kneel. Not literally, but close enough. They wanted me to bow my head to a 12-year-old who'd been taught that I was worth less than his shoes. They wanted me to accept blame I didn't deserve. They wanted me to keep playing the role they'd assigned me before I was old enough to understand I had a choice. Did I have a choice? The question felt revolutionary and terrifying at the same time. Kim, my mother hissed, her voice tight with barely suppressed frustration. Everyone's waiting. I looked around the room. 20 faces watched me with varying degrees of discomfort, curiosity, and judgment. My Aunt Carol looked away when my eyes landed on her. Uncle Robert studied his beer bottle. Cousin Michelle shifted her weight awkwardly. They all knew this was wrong. They all knew Tyler's behaviour was unacceptable. They all knew I was being blamed for something that wasn't my fault. But not one of them would say it. Not one of them would defend me. They'd all made the same calculation I'd made my entire life. It was easier to sacrifice Kim than to disrupt the family peace. I was the acceptable loss. I'd always been the acceptable loss. My hands started to shake, and for the first time in my life, it wasn't from anxiety or fear. It was rage, pure, white-hot rage that had been building for 35 years, compressed and contained and denied until this moment, when it threatened to explode out of me. I'd been so good, so compliant, so understanding. I'd absorbed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of casual cruelty, and told myself it was fine. That's just how families work. That's just how my family works. I'd made excuses for their behaviour until the excuses became a cage I'd built around myself. But standing there shaking with suppressed fury, while 20 people waited for me to apologise to a child for his own mistake, I finally saw the truth Margaret had tried to show me. I hadn't been keeping the peace. I'd been enabling abuse, and the abuser had gotten so comfortable with my compliance that they didn't even hide it anymore. This wasn't even behind closed doors. This was in front of the entire extended family, because they knew no one would stop them. They knew I wouldn't stop them. But something had changed. That crack inside me had become a chasm. "Kim?" Sarah said, her voice still sickeningly sweet. "Tyler is waiting for his apology." I opened my mouth, and for a terrifying moment, I didn't know what was going to come out. An apology. The truth. A scream of 35 years of accumulated pain. Before I could speak, Tyler stepped forward, clearly frustrated by my hesitation. His hand rose high in the air, and I understood what was about to happen a split second before it did. I looked past him to my mother's face, searching for some sign that she would stop this, that she would intervene, that she would finally, after 35 years, choose me. But her face remained impassive, uncomfortable perhaps, embarrassed at the scene, but not angry at Tyler, not protective of me. She was going to let this happen. They all were. And in that moment, I made a choice I should have made decades ago. The first slap came hard across my left cheek, the sound of it cracking through the silent room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side, and I felt the sting spread across my skin, hot and sharp. I didn't move, didn't raise my hand to my face, didn't cry out. I just stood there, and in that fraction of a second, I understood that if I reacted, if I gave them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt, they would find a way to make it my fault. They would say I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting, that Tyler was just a child who didn't know his own strength, so I didn't react at all. The second slap came from the other side, catching my right cheek. My ears rang. Somewhere far away, I heard a sharp intake of breath from someone in the room, but no one spoke. No one moved to stop it. Tyler's face was red with anger and something else, something that looked almost like excitement. He'd never been told no in his entire life. He'd never faced real consequences. And now, with his mother standing behind him and 20 adults watching in silence, he had permission to do whatever he wanted. The third slap, the fourth, the fifth, each one echoed in the silent room. Each one landed with the full force of a 12-year-old who'd grown up believing he was entitled to everything and everyone. My face burned. My vision blurred slightly. But I didn't move. I stood perfectly still, my arms at my sides, the soda bottle and napkins long forgotten on the floor where I'd dropped them. I could have stopped him. I was 35 years old, physically capable of restraining a child. But something kept me frozen in place. Some deep understanding that this moment needed to happen exactly as it was happening, that every person in this room needed to see with absolute clarity what my family really was. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I heard a nervous laugh from somewhere to my left, someone clearing their throat uncomfortably. The sound of footsteps as someone walked out of the room, unable or unwilling to witness what was happening, but equally unable to stop it. Still, no one intervened. My father sat in his armchair, frozen like a statue, his face pale, but his body motionless. My mother stood beside the couch, one hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide, but she didn't move either. Didn't speak. Didn't tell Tyler to stop. Sarah had pulled out her phone. I could see her in my peripheral vision, thumb scrolling completely disconnected from what her son was doing. As if this were happening on a screen somewhere far away, not in her parents' living room, not to her own sister. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. My cheeks were numb. Now, though, I could feel warmth that I knew was probably blood from where his ring had caught my lip. The taste of copper filled my mouth. My jaw ached, but more than the physical pain, I felt something else. A strange, cold clarity settling over me like a blanket. This was who they were. This was who they'd always been. I hadn't been imagining the favoritism, the dismissal, the casual cruelty. I hadn't been oversensitive or dramatic, or any of the things I'd been told I was when I dared to express hurt. This moment was simply the culmination of 35 years of the same dynamic played out in its most undeniable form. A 12-year-old was assaulting me in front of 20 adults, and not one of them cared enough to stop it. 16, 17, 18. Tyler's breathing was heavy now, his arm probably getting tired. But he kept going, determined to finish whatever point he thought he was making. That I deserved this. That I was less than him. That my worth as a human being was so negligible that he could hit me without consequence. And the truly devastating part was that he was right. There would be no consequences. Everyone in this room would find a way to excuse it, minimize it, or forget it entirely. By next week, it would be a story they told themselves about how I'd overreacted to a child's tantrum, how I'd made a scene at Tyler's celebration. They would make this my fault too. 19, 20. When Tyler finally stopped his hand falling to his side, his chest heaving with exertion, the room remained eerily silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see if I would cry or scream or storm out in dramatic fashion so they could roll their eyes and say, "That's just Kim being emotional." But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, something happened to my face that I couldn't control even if I'd wanted to. My lips curved upward into a smile. Not a sad smile, not a bitter smile. Something else entirely, something calm and knowing and utterly foreign to the woman who'd walked into this house 2 hours ago. It was the smile of someone who'd finally, after 35 years, seen clearly, who'd stopped lying to themselves, who'd realised that the cage they'd been living in had an open door and they'd been free to walk through it at any time. The smile made Tyler step back, confusion replacing the anger on his face. It made my mother's hand drop from her mouth. It made several relatives shift uncomfortably, exchanging glances that asked the same question. Why is she smiling? I reached up slowly and touched my lip where it had split. My fingers came away red. I looked at the blood for a moment, then at Tyler, then at Sarah, then at my parents, and finally at the room full of witnesses who'd watched a child assault me and done nothing. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady despite my swelling lip. "Thank you for finally showing me who you really are." The silence that followed was different than before. This one was confused, uncertain, tinged with the first hints of unease. I bent down and picked up my purse from where I'd set it by the couch, moving slowly and deliberately. Every eye in the room tracked my movements. When I straightened, I looked directly at my mother and father. "Check your mail in a few days," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. I let my eyes sweep across the assembled relatives. "All of you, you're going to want to read it carefully." I didn't wait for a response, didn't explain, didn't justify or apologise or try to make them understand. I simply turned and walked toward the front door, my footsteps the only sound in that silent house. Behind me, I heard Sarah's voice sharp with irritation. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool evening air, closing it quietly behind me. No slamming, no dramatic exit, just a calm, controlled departure that somehow felt more powerful than any amount of yelling could have been. I walked to my car, got in and started the engine. Through the front window, I could see shapes moving inside the house, probably gathering to discuss what had just happened to craft the narrative that would make this my fault. But for the first time in my entire life, I didn't care what they thought, didn't care what they said, didn't care if they understood or if they ever saw me as valuable, because I finally saw myself clearly, and that was enough. I pulled out of the driveway and drove away from my childhood home, away from the family who'd never really been family toward a future I couldn't quite see yet, but knew with absolute certainty would be better than the past I was leaving behind. The smile never left my face. The smile faded somewhere around the third stoplight. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. The adrenaline that had carried me through those final moments at my parents' house was draining away, leaving behind something raw and overwhelming that I couldn't name. I sat in the darkness of my car, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, and realised I had nowhere to go. I couldn't go up to my apartment and sit alone with what had just happened. Couldn't face the silence and the empty rooms and my own thoughts spiraling in circles. Margaret. The thought came to me with the clarity of a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Margaret would understand. Margaret had warned me this was coming, even if neither of us had known what form it would take. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. 10:45. Too late for a social call, but this wasn't social. This was survival. I walked to the 30 feet to Margaret's door and knocked quietly, hoping she was still awake. The hallway light illuminated enough for me to catch my reflection in the small decorative mirror she kept by her door, and I saw what I'd been avoiding since I got in the car. My face was a mess. Both cheeks were swollen and red, already darkening to purple in places. My bottom lip was split and crusted with dried blood. My left eye was puffy, the skin around it tender and discoloured. I looked like I'd been in a fight. I had been in a fight. I just hadn't fought back. The door opened and Margaret stood there in her bathrobe, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. Her expression went from confusion to alarm in the span of a heartbeat. "Oh my God, Kimberly," she breathed, reaching for me. "What happened? Who did this to you?" That's when I broke, completely, utterly broke, in a way I'd never allowed myself before. The sob that came out of me was ugly and raw, 35 years of suppressed pain finally finding its way to the surface. Margaret pulled me inside and wrapped her arms around me, and I collapsed against her small frame, shaking with sobs I couldn't control. "My family," I managed to choke out between gasping breaths. They watched. Margaret guided me to her couch, the same couch where we'd had tea 3 days ago when she'd warned me about self-destruction. That conversation felt like it had happened in another lifetime to another person. The woman who'd sat here 3 days ago had still believed deep down that her family loved her. That woman was gone. Margaret brought ice wrapped in a dish towel for my face, and tissues and a glass of water I couldn't drink because my hands were shaking too badly. She sat beside me and waited while I cried, not trying to rush me or fix it, just being present, in the way only someone who'd lived through real loss could be. When I could finally speak in coherent sentences, I told her everything. The party for Tyler's participation trophy, the soda spill, Tyler's explosion, my parents telling me to apologise, Sarah encouraging her son to express his disappointment. And then the 20 slaps while 20 adults watched and did nothing. Not one person stopped him. I said, my voice hollow. Not one. Some laughed, some looked away. My sister was on her phone, but nobody intervened. Nobody said, "That's enough." Nobody protected me. Margaret's face had gone pale as I spoke, her hand gripping mine tightly. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and I saw tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "I told you about my daughter Emily," she said, finally, her voice thick. "I told you I lost her because I prioritised keeping the family together over her safety. But I don't know if I made it clear enough how much I live with that regret every single day." She turned to face me, fully taking both my hands in hers. "Emily came to me 6 times in the last year of her life. 6 times she showed me bruises and told me she was scared. And 6 times I told her to try harder, to be patient, to remember her vows, to think of the children, to keep the family together." Margaret's voice broke. "The 7th time she came to me, it was in a coffin. And I have spent every day of the last 30 years wishing I could go back and tell her to run, to choose herself, to understand that some families aren't worth keeping together." I squeezed her hands, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Don't make my mistake, child," Margaret said fiercely. "You've spent 35 years teaching them they can treat you this way. Every time you stayed silent, every time you apologised for things that weren't your fault, every time you paid their bills and swallowed your hurt, you gave them permission. You taught them that you don't matter." I didn't know how to stop, I whispered. "You know now," she said. Tonight, you learned. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? I took a shaky breath and Margaret's earlier words from 3 days ago came back to me. I told her then that I handled my family's financial paperwork to help them. The memory sparked a connection I hadn't made before. Margaret, I said slowly, I told you I've been helping my family with money, but I just realised I don't actually know what I've been paying for. I set up automatic transfers years ago, and I just kept them going. Margaret's eyes narrowed sharp and focused, despite her age. Sweetheart, what exactly have you been helping them with? Their mortgage, I said. At least I thought it was helping with their mortgage. They said they were having trouble a few years back, so I set up a monthly payment. But now that I think about it, they never actually told me when to stop, and I never asked. How long ago was this? 5 years, maybe more. Margaret was quiet for a moment, and I could see her mind working. Kimberly, do you have access to those payment records? Do you know where that money's actually going? I'd never looked. That was the truth of it. I'd set up the automatic payment and then ignored it, the same way I'd ignored so many uncomfortable truths about my family. Out of sight, out of mind. Don't examine too closely or you might not like what you find. But I'd already found something I didn't like tonight. I'd found 20 adults who watched a child assault me and did nothing. What was one more uncomfortable truth compared to that? I have copies of everything, I said. I'm obsessive about documentation. Comes with being a financial analyst. Then I think you need to look at those documents, Margaret said gently. Really look at them, because I've learnt something in my 78 years child. When people treat you like you don't matter, there's usually a reason, and that reason is often financial. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard earlier about my grandmother's inheritance, the casual assumption that I'd cover the costs, Sarah's expensive lifestyle that didn't match her supposed income. I stood up suddenly needing to know, needing to understand exactly what I'd been funding all these years. I need my laptop, I said. It's in my apartment. Go get it, Margaret said. Bring it back here. You shouldn't be alone right now. I nodded and hurried the short distance to my apartment, grabbed my laptop from my desk and returned to Margaret's couch within 3 minutes. My hands were steadier now, purpose replacing the shaking of earlier. Margaret made fresh tea while I powered up the computer and logged into my financial records. Let me check something, I muttered, pulling up my bank account history. 5 years of automatic payments to an account I'd labelled Family Mortgage Help stared back at me. Margaret sat beside me, looking over my shoulder as I started to dig deeper, and what I found in those records would change everything. The first thing I noticed was an email in my inbox from 3 days ago buried under work correspondence and spam. The subject line read, Property Ownership Verification Required, 45 Maple Street. I'd seen it when it arrived, but assumed it was junk mail. Some phishing scam or mortgage refinance solicitation. I'd almost deleted it without opening. Now, with Margaret watching over my shoulder, I clicked it open. Dear Ms. Thompson, it began. This correspondence is from Morrison & Associates, representing First National Bank, regarding property located at 45 Maple Street. Our records indicate you are listed as joint legal owner of this property. We need to confirm your current contact information and ownership status for our files. Please respond within 10 business days. I read it twice, then a third time. Joint legal owner. That couldn't be right. I don't understand, I said to Margaret. I'm not an owner. I've just been helping with payments. When did you start helping? Margaret asked, her voice careful. 5 years ago. My parents said they were having trouble with the mortgage after my dad's hours got cut at work. They asked if I could help out temporarily until they got back on their feet. And did they get back on their feet? I thought about it. My father had retired 2 years ago. My mother had never worked outside the home. Sarah had been living there rent-free for 5 years. If anything, their financial situation should have gotten worse, not better. "I don't think they ever tried," I said slowly. I pulled up my bank records and filtered for the automatic payment I'd set up. 5 years of monthly transfers, $1,200 each, sent like clockwork to an account labelled First National Mortgage, 45 Maple Street. 60 months, $1,200 per month. I'd paid $72,000 toward my parents' mortgage. "Oh my God," I whispered. Margaret squeezed my shoulder. "Keep looking, sweetheart." I went back further, searching my email for any correspondence about the mortgage. And there it was, 5 years ago, an email from my mother. "Kim Honey, attached are the refinancing documents your father mentioned. We need your signature as a reference to get better interest rates. Don't worry about reading all the legal jargon. Just sign where the arrows are and send them back. Thank you for helping us out. Love, Mum." I'd signed them. I remembered now vaguely. I'd been at work, stressed about a deadline, and I'd printed the documents signed where indicated scan them and sent them back without reading the fine print. My mother had said it was just a formality, just a reference, just helping out. But now, looking at that lawyer's email, I understood what I'd actually signed. "I need to call this lawyer," I said, reaching for my phone. It was nearly 11:30 at night, but the email had included a mobile number for urgent matters. A man answered on the third ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "David Morrison." "Mr. Morrison, this is Kimberly Thompson. I just saw your email about 45 Maple Street." "Ms. Thompson, thank you for calling. I apologise for the late-night correspondence, but we're trying to update our records. Can you confirm you're listed as joint owner on the property deed?" "I don't know," I said honestly. I thought I was just a reference for a refinance 5 years ago. There was a pause. "Ms. Thompson, I'm looking at the county records right now. Your name appears as joint owner on the title deed recorded 5 years ago during the refinance. You're not a reference or a co-signer. You're a legal owner with full property rights." The room seemed to tilt. Margaret gripped my arm, steadying me. "But I've just been making payments to help them out," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "According to bank records, you've been making all the payments for the past 60 months. You're not helping with the mortgage, Ms. Thompson. You're paying the entire mortgage. The only name on the payment account is yours." My parents hadn't been making any payments at all. For 5 years, I'd been funding their entire mortgage, while they told me it was temporary help, while Sarah lived there rent-free in her expensive clothes, while Tyler grew up in a house I was paying for learning to treat me like garbage. "Miss Morrison," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "what are my legal rights here?" "As joint owner and sole payer, you have substantial rights. You could, for instance, require other occupants to pay rent. You could demand to be bought out of your ownership stake. You could, if you chose, discontinue payments and allow the foreclosure process to proceed, though I wouldn't recommend that without careful consideration." "What happens if I stop paying?" Another pause. "The bank would send foreclosure notices to all owners of record after 30 days of non-payment. That would include you and your parents. But Ms. Thompson foreclosure is a serious..." "Thank you," I said. "I need to think about this. I'll be in touch." I hung up before he could continue and sat staring at my laptop screen, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. Margaret said nothing, just waited while I processed. They'd tricked me. That was the simple truth of it. They told me I was just signing as a reference, knowing I wouldn't read the documents carefully, knowing I was always too eager to help, too afraid to question, too desperate to be useful. And then they'd let me pay their mortgage for 5 years, while treating me like I was worthless. I thought about Tyler's hand striking my face 20 times while they watched. I thought about the inheritance I'd never received. I thought about 35 years of being invisible, dismissed, used. And I thought about the lawyer's words, "You could discontinue payments and allow the foreclosure process to proceed." A plan began forming in my mind, clear and cold and perfectly justified. Not revenge, not cruelty, just the natural consequences of their own actions finally coming home to roost. I opened my online banking app and navigated to the automatic payment screen. My finger hovered over the button that would cancel the monthly transfer. If I stop the auto payment, I said aloud, more to myself than to Margaret. What happens? Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. The truth comes out. That's what happens. They find out exactly who's been holding them up all these years. I clicked the button, cancelled the automatic payment, confirmed the cancellation. It was done. Then I opened my email and began typing to Mr. Morrison, my hands steady and sure. Dear Mr. V. Morrison, please proceed with whatever foreclosure notification procedures are required by law when mortgage payments cease. I will not be resuming payments on this property. Sincerely, Kimberly Thompson. I hit send before I could second-guess myself and sat back against Margaret's couch, feeling something I hadn't felt in 35 years. Free. 30 days felt both endless and instantaneous. My face healed the bruises, fading from purple to yellow to nothing, though I found myself touching my cheek, sometimes remembering. I went to work, analysed portfolios, attended meetings, and smiled at colleagues who had no idea their quiet co-worker had just set off a bomb with a 30-day fuse. Margaret checked on me every evening. She never asked if I was sure about what I'd done, never suggested I reconsider. She understood that some decisions once made have to play out to their conclusion. On day 29, Mr. Morrison called to confirm the foreclosure notices would be mailed the following day. Ms. Thompson, once your parents receive this notice, they'll know you're listed as owner and that you've stopped making payments. There will likely be significant family conflict. I understand, I said calmly. Thank you for your professionalism. On day 30, I woke knowing today was the day. I'd received my copy of the foreclosure notice yesterday, certified mail official bank letterhead, impossible to ignore. I called in sick to work and spent the morning printing 5 years of bank statements highlighting each mortgage payment in yellow. $1,200, 60 times $72,000 total. I organised them in a burgundy folder that looked official and undeniable. I dressed carefully in a charcoal grey blazer and black pants, professional armour for what was coming. I looked like the financial analyst I was, someone who dealt in numbers and facts and documentation. Someone who couldn't be dismissed or ignored. At 1:30, I drove to my parents' house. I parked down the street and waited. At 2:15, the mail truck stopped and the carrier walked up with a certified letter. My father signed for it. I gave them 10 minutes to open it, read it, and begin to panic. When I walked up to the front door, I could hear raised voices inside. I didn't knock. This was technically my house too. I simply opened the door and walked in. The scene was exactly what I'd expected. My parents sat on the couch, the foreclosure notice spread between them like a grenade. My mother's face was pale, her hands shaking. My father held his phone, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Sarah stood behind them in pyjamas at 2:30 in the afternoon, a pool of spilled coffee spreading across the floor at her feet. Tyler was mercifully absent. They all looked up when I entered, shock and confusion flooding their faces. Kim, my mother breathed, what are you doing here? I got the same notice, I said, calmly holding up my copy. Interesting timing, isn't it? My father stood, the letter clutched in his hand. There's been some kind of mistake. The bank is saying we haven't made a mortgage payment in 30 days. But that's impossible. Have you? I asked, my voice mild and curious. Of course we have. Sarah, didn't we just send a payment? Sarah's face went from pale to bright red. I thought you were handling it, Dad. Kim, we need your help, he said, turning to me. There's been some kind of banking error. Can you look into it? The audacity took my breath away. Even now, they expected me to fix their problem. It's not an error, I said quietly. I stopped making the payments 30 days ago. That's why you received this notice. Complete silence. You stopped, my mother whispered. But why would you? You asked me to help temporarily 5 years ago. I helped for 60 months, every single month. I opened the folder, spreading the highlighted bank statements across the coffee table. $1,200, over and over, my account number clearly visible. What is this? My father demanded, but his voice had lost its authority. This is proof that I've been making every single mortgage payment on this house for 5 years, not helping, not contributing, paying the entire mortgage myself while you told me it was temporary. Sarah grabbed her statement eyes, scanning the numbers. This can't be right. We've been paying our share. Haven't we, Mum? My mother said nothing. She just stared at the statements like they were written in a language she couldn't translate. My father's phone rang, making everyone jump. He answered without checking the caller ID, his voice shaking. Hello, yes, this is Robert Thompson. No, there hasn't been an error. I watched his face drain of colour. What do you mean about the owner? The account holder is Kimberly Thompson, and she's listed as the legal owner. Since when? Since 5 years ago, I said calmly, when you asked me to sign refinancing papers. Remember, you said not to bother reading them, that they were just a formality. The phone slipped from his hand. Sarah grabbed it, pressing it to her ear, her eyes wide. Can you explain what's going on? My sister is listed as an owner. How is that possible? She listened for a moment, then slowly lowered the phone, her face white. They're saying Kim's name is on the title deed. They're saying she's been the only one making payments for 5 years. They're saying the house belongs to her. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me with identical expressions of shock and dawning horror. I smiled the same calm, knowing smile I'd worn when I left this house 30 days ago. Would you like to see the rest? I asked, gesturing to the folder. I have 5 years of bank statements, every single mortgage payment, $72,000, all from my account. Nobody answered. They just stared at the papers spread across the coffee table, watching their entire reality rearrange itself around a truth they'd never bothered to verify. The house they'd lived in, the house they'd taken for granted, the house Sarah had moved back into rent-free, had been mine all along. And they'd never even asked. The silence lasted maybe 10 seconds before my father found his voice again. And when he did, it wasn't the voice of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth. It was the voice of outrage, of wounded dignity, of a man who'd just been deeply wronged. Kimberly Marie Thompson, he said, using my full name like I was a child being scolded. How can you be so selfish? The word hit me like a physical blow, not because it hurt, but because it was so predictable, so perfectly, exactly what I'd expected him to say. Selfish, I repeated calmly. You would actually put your own parents on the street, your sister, your nephew, over what, some petty grievance? This is unconscionable. My mother nodded vigorously, tears starting to stream down her face. Kim, how could you do this to us? We're your family. We raised you. We gave you everything. I almost laughed. They'd given me everything except acknowledgement, respect, love, or basic human decency. But I kept my expression neutral, watching them perform their outrage like actors who'd rehearsed these lines their entire lives. I paid your mortgage for 5 years, I said quietly. $72,000. You told me it was temporary. Well, we couldn't afford it, my father shot back. What were we supposed to do? And you make good money, Kim. You don't have a family to support. It's not like you needed that money. There it was, the fundamental belief that had governed my entire relationship with them. My money wasn't really mine. My life wasn't really mine. I existed to fill in the gaps in their lives, to be the backup plan, to provide whatever they needed, without question or complaint. Sarah had been quiet during this exchange, but now she moved forward, mascara running down her face, her hands clutched to her chest like she was experiencing physical pain. Kim, she sobbed, I can't believe you're doing this. You're destroying our family. You're punishing an innocent child because of some grudge against me. Tyler lives here. This is his home. How can you be so cruel? An innocent child. Tyler. The same Tyler who'd slapped me 20 times while she watched and did nothing. But of course, she wouldn't mention that. Of course, that incident had already been rewritten in their minds as something else, something less, something that was probably my fault anyway. Where is Tyler? I asked. At school, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. Thank God he doesn't have to see this, see what his aunt has become. As if summoned by his name, I heard the front door open. Tyler walked in backpack slung over one shoulder and froze when he saw me standing in the living room surrounded by his family's distress. What's going on? He asked, looking from face to face. Nothing, sweetheart, Sarah said quickly. Just some adult problems. Why don't you go to your room? But Tyler didn't move. He looked at me and I saw something flicker across his face. Not remorse. Not guilt. Something closer to satisfaction, like seeing me here in the middle of family chaos confirmed everything his mother had ever told him about me. He smirked. Actually, smirked. Then he walked past me toward the stairs, but not before saying loud enough for everyone to hear, I told you Aunt Kim was dramatic. Nobody corrected him. Nobody told him that was inappropriate. Sarah actually smiled a little through her tears, like his rudeness was somehow charming proof of his spirit. I felt that cold clarity settle over me again, the same feeling I'd had when I was being slapped. This was who they were, all of them. And nothing I said or did would change that fundamental truth. I'm not continuing the mortgage payments, I said, my voice cutting through my mother's crying. That's not negotiable. Then what are we supposed to do? My father demanded. We can't afford the mortgage on our own. You know that. Are you really going to let the bank take the house? Let your parents become homeless? You have options, I said. You can get jobs, you can downsize, you can ask Sarah to contribute rent since she's been living here free for 5 years. You can take out a loan, you can sell the house and buy something more affordable. Those aren't options, my mother wailed. We're too old to start over. We've lived here for 40 years. This is our home. It's my home too, apparently, I said. According to the title deed, you had me sign without reading. That was just to help us get better rates, my father said. You weren't supposed to. You can't just. Kim, you have to fix this right now. Call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. Resume the payments. Fix this immediately. There was no question in his voice. No request, just the absolute assumption that I would do what I'd always done. Solve their problems, sacrifice my needs, make everything okay again. No, I said simply. The word hung in the air like a foreign object none of them knew how to process. No, my mother repeated. What do you mean, no? I mean I'm not fixing this. I'm not resuming payments. This is your problem to solve. You're being irrational, my father said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd used my entire life when I dared to disagree with him. You're upset about something we can tell, but you're not thinking clearly. When you calm down, you'll see that the right thing to do is... I'm completely calm, I interrupted. And I'm completely clear. I've been paying for a house I don't live in while being treated like I don't matter. That's over now. This is about the stupid incident at the party, Sarah said, her tears drying up now, replaced with anger. You're still mad about that Tyler barely touched you. You're holding a grudge over a child's tantrum. I looked at her for a long moment, this sister who'd watched her son assault me and called it a tantrum, who'd stolen my inheritance and built her life on money that should have been mine, who'd lived rent-free for 5 years in a house I'd been paying for. Goodbye, I said, picking up my folder. You have the foreclosure notice. You have 30 days to figure out your next steps. Kim, wait, my mother called. We need to talk about this. You can't just leave. But I could, and I did. I walked out of that house for the second time in 30 days, and this time I knew I wouldn't be back. Through the living room window, as I walked to my car, I could see them gathering in a tight circle, talking frantically. Sarah had already pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard, even as my mother continued crying and my father paced. I knew what she was searching for. How to contest ownership. How to remove me from the deed. How to undo what they'd done 5 years ago when they'd added my name to get better interest rates, never imagining I might actually use that ownership. They were going to fight this. I could see it in Sarah's determined expression, in my father's aggressive pacing, in the way they were already strategizing their counterattack. Good. Let them try. I had 5 years of bank statements, a legal deed with my name on it, and the truth on my side. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. 3 days of silence followed that confrontation. 3 days where my phone didn't ring, where no texts appeared, where my family seemed to have finally accepted that I meant what I said. I went to work, came home, had dinner with Margaret, and slept better than I had in years. Maybe that's why I let my guard down when my mother's name appeared on my phone screen on the 4th evening. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Kim, sweetheart." My mother's voice was soft, conciliatory, nothing like the outraged tears from 3 days ago. "I know things have been difficult. Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking and talking. We'd like you to come to dinner tomorrow night. Just the 4 of us, no Tyler. We need to talk about this calmly as a family." I should have hung up immediately, but some small part of me, the part that had spent 35 years at Kyrgyzstan, hoping they might change, wanted to believe this was real. "What's there to talk about?" I asked carefully. "Everything, honey. We were shocked the other day. We reacted poorly. But we've had time to think, and we realise there are things we need to discuss. Please, just dinner. Let's try to work this out like adults." I heard the manipulation even as I agreed to come. But I also heard something else in her voice, something calculated and rehearsed. And that's when I knew this wasn't about reconciliation. "Tomorrow at 6, I said. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long moment. Then I opened the voice memo app and tested the recording function. Clear, audio date and time stamped automatically. If they were planning something, I'd have proof. The next evening, I arrived at my parents' house with my phone in my blazer pocket, recording already running. I'd dressed professionally, again armour against whatever was coming. They'd set the dining room table formally, something they only did for holidays. Candles, the good china, a roast in the centre that smelled like my childhood. It was all so carefully staged, so deliberately designed to evoke nostalgia and family warmth. "Kim," my mother hugged me at the door longer than usual. "Thank you for coming. We've missed you." Sarah was already seated at the table wearing a soft pink sweater that made her look vulnerable and kind. She gave me a small, sad smile. "Hey, sis." My father carved the roast while my mother served vegetables, everyone making pleasant small talk about weather and work. It was so aggressively normal that it set every alarm bell ringing in my head. Halfway through dinner, my mother set down her fork and looked at me with watery eyes. "Kim, honey, we've been thinking about the house situation." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "We understand you're upset. We should have been clearer about the arrangement 5 years ago. We can see how you might feel taken advantage of." Might feel, as if my feelings weren't based on objective reality. "But we're family," she continued, "and family works things out. So I need to ask you directly, sweetheart. You're going to let us keep living in the house, right? You're not really going to force your own parents out onto the street." The question hung in the air and I suddenly understood. She wanted me to say no, to say clearly on record somewhere that I intended to evict them, to paint me as the villain in whatever story they were constructing. "I haven't decided anything yet," I said carefully, my voice neutral. "I'm still evaluating my options." "Your options?" My father's voice had an edge. "What options? Either you're going to help your family or you're not. Shazkias, I need to understand the full situation first, I said, cutting a piece of roast with deliberate precision. How much equity is in the house? What are your income sources? What's your plan for covering the mortgage going forward? Our plan was that you continue helping like you've been doing, Sarah said, and there was something sharp beneath her soft tone, like family does. For how long? I asked. 5 more years, 10 forever. Until we didn't need help anymore, my mother said. That's what you do for people you love, Kim. You don't put conditions on it. You don't keep score. I didn't keep score. The irony was almost funny. I had literally kept score in the form of 5 years of highlighted bank statements, and they were sitting in my apartment as evidence of exactly how one-sided this family's love had always been. I'm not making any decisions tonight, I said. I need time to think. Time to think about what? My father demanded, his carefully maintained calm starting to crack. About whether you're going to destroy your family over money. About what's fair, I said, for everyone involved. The dinner ended stiffly an hour later. They'd learnt nothing from me, gotten no damaging statements, no emotional outbursts they could use to paint me as unstable or vindictive. As I left, I saw frustration flickering across all 3 faces. I drove home, stopped the recording, and saved it with the date and time. Insurance, though I wasn't sure yet what I'd need insurance against. I was making tea in my apartment when my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Are you okay? I saw you come home. Before I could reply, I heard voices in the hallway. Not Margaret's apartment, these were coming from the stairwell echoing up. I cracked my door open slightly and heard Sarah's voice sharp and businesslike. Mr. Davidson? Yes, this is Sarah Mitchell. I got your name from a friend who said you were very creative with property law. A pause. Exactly. My sister's name is on the house title, but she didn't pay for it, and now she's trying to steal it from my elderly parents. I need someone who can fix this situation. Another pause longer. I understand it's complex. That's why I need someone creative. Money isn't an issue. How soon can we meet? I closed my door silently, my heart pounding. They weren't just going to fight this. They were hiring a lawyer who specialized in creative interpretations of property law, someone who didn't care about truth or documentation, just about winning. The game had just gotten significantly more dangerous. I sat on my couch staring at my phone, Sarah's words still echoing in my mind. A creative lawyer, someone who didn't care about the truth, just about winning. I'd spent 3 days feeling powerful, feeling like I'd finally taken control of my life. And in one overheard phone call, that confidence had started to crack. What if they found a way to take the house, despite the documentation? What if their creative lawyer was more creative than my honest lawyer? What if I'd started a war I couldn't win? My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. A text from an unknown number. Your family has more secrets. Check your grandmother's will from 15 years ago. You deserve to know the truth. Below the message were 3 attached files. PDF scans of documents that looked old, the paper yellowed even in digital form. My finger hovered over the attachments. This could be anything. A scam, a trap, something Sarah had set up to get me to incriminate myself somehow. But curiosity and something deeper, a bone-deep need to understand just how far the betrayal went, made me tap the first file. It opened to a handwritten document dated 15 years ago, 2 months before my grandmother died. The heading read, Codicil to Last Will and Testament of Margaret Ann Thompson. I knew my grandmother's will had been processed after her death. I remembered my parents telling me she'd left her savings to help with family expenses, which I'd assumed meant split between them and their children. I'd been 20 years old in college, and I'd accepted that explanation without question. But this document told a different story. To my granddaughter Kimberly, the handwriting read in my grandmother's distinctive script, I leave the sum of $45,000 and the property known as the Thompson family cottage in Ashford County. This child has been overlooked and dismissed her entire life by her family. She deserves to know that I saw her, valued her, and want her to have means of her own. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My grandmother had seen me. She'd known. She'd tried to give me something, not just money, but acknowledgement, validation, proof that I mattered to someone. But I'd never received $45,000. I'd never heard about a cottage. I'd never even been told this codicil existed. With shaking hands, I opened the second attachment. It was a waiver form dated 3 weeks after my grandmother's death, bearing my signature at the bottom. I, Kimberly Marie Thompson, voluntarily decline the additional bequest outlined in the codicil dated March 15th. I understand this means I forfeit all claims to the $45,000 and the Ashford County property. I make this decision freely and without coercion. The signature looked exactly like mine. The handwriting was perfect, the loops and curves identical to how I had signed documents at 20 years old. But I'd never signed this. I'd never even seen it. I stared at that signature for a full minute, and the betrayal that washed over me was so profound it felt physical. They'd forged my signature. They'd stolen my inheritance and made it look like I'd given it up willingly. The third attachment was a bank record, a copy of a check dated 15 years ago for $45,000, made out to Sarah Mitchell, memo line reading wedding funds. Below it was a property transfer document showing the Ashford cottage sold 6 months after my grandmother's death, the proceeds split between my parents and Sarah. They'd taken everything my grandmother had tried to give me and divided it among themselves. And then they'd made sure I never knew it existed. I thought about Sarah's wedding, how lavish it had been. I'd been in college, unable to afford to attend because I was working 2 jobs to pay tuition. My parents had sent me photos of the venue, the flowers, the designer dress. I remembered thinking how lucky Sarah was, that our parents could afford to give her such a beautiful wedding. It hadn't been their money, it had been mine. I thought about Sarah's business startup 5 years ago, how she'd suddenly had professional photography equipment and a website and marketing materials. She'd told everyone she'd saved for years to make her dream come true. She'd used my money my grandmother had left specifically for me for the granddaughter, who'd been ignored too long. The cottage was gone, too sold to strangers. I tried to remember it from childhood visits, a small house by a lake, peaceful and quiet, the one place where my grandmother and I would sit on the porch and talk while Sarah entertained my parents inside. That cottage should have been mine. A place of my own, a refuge, something my grandmother had specifically wanted me to have. All of it stolen. And not just stolen, but covered up with forged documents that made it look like I'd rejected her gift willingly. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Patricia Chen, an estate lawyer I'd worked with on a client's trust fund 2 years ago. It was nearly 9:30 at night, but this couldn't wait. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice professional despite the late hour. "Kimberly, is everything all right?" "Patricia, I'm sorry to call so late. I need to know something about inheritance fraud." My voice was surprisingly steady despite the tears still streaming down my face. If someone forged a document 15 years ago to steal an inheritance, can it still be prosecuted? Or is there a statute of limitations? There was a pause on the other end. "That's very specific. Are we talking hypothetically, or do you have an actual case?" "I have an actual case," I said, looking at the 3 documents still glowing on my phone screen. "I have proof. I have the real will, the forged waiver, and the money trail. I just need to know if it's too late to do anything about it." "The statute of limitations for inheritance fraud varies by state," Patricia said, and I could hear her shifting into professional mode. "But there's something called the discovery rule. The clock doesn't start when the fraud occurs. It starts when you discover it. If you just found out about this, you have 3 to 5 years from the date of discovery to pursue legal action." 3 to 5 years. The relief that washed over me was dizzying. "Can you meet tomorrow?" I asked. "I need to show you something." 9 a.m, my office. She said without hesitation. "Bring everything you have." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. This child has been overlooked and dismissed her entire life. She'd known. She'd tried to help, and they'd stolen even that from me. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. They'd assumed I'd never find out, never fight back, never demand what was mine. I looked at my phone at the anonymous message that had started this revelation and typed a response. "Thank you. Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who knows what it's like to be erased by family. Make them pay." I would, not out of vengeance, but out of something simpler and more powerful. Justice. Patricia Chen's office was downtown on the 14th floor of a glass building that reflected the morning sun like a mirror. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a folder containing printouts of the 3 documents the anonymous sender had provided, along with my own research from a sleepless night. Patricia was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and precise, the kind of lawyer who missed nothing. She'd made her reputation handling complex estate disputes, and I'd watched her systematically dismantle a fraudulent trust claim for one of my clients 2 years ago. She reviewed the documents in silence, her expression growing darker with each page. When she finished, she looked up at me with something like anger in her eyes. "This is textbook inheritance fraud," she said. "The forged waiver, the money trail, the property transfer, it's all documented. Normally, the statute of limitations would be 5 years from the date of the crime, but there's an exception called the discovery rule." She pulled up a legal database on her computer showing me the relevant statutes. The clock doesn't start when the fraud occurs. It starts when you discover the fraud. Since you only learned about this yesterday, you have 3 years from now to pursue legal action, either criminal or civil. "I don't want them in prison," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I just want them to stop, to face consequences, to understand they can't keep doing this. Then we focus on civil action and use criminal prosecution as leverage," Patricia said. "But first, we need to prove that signature is forged. I know an excellent forensic document examiner. She'll need samples of your genuine signature from around that time period and the forged waiver. It'll cost about $1,200. I didn't hesitate. "Do it." "There's something else you should know," Patricia continued. "If your family discovers you're building a case, they'll likely escalate their own efforts. Be prepared for that." Her words proved prophetic. That afternoon, while I was at work, my phone started buzzing with messages. Aunt Carol, Uncle Robert, Cousin Michelle, all of them sending variations of the same theme. "Kim, we need to talk about what you're doing to your parents. This isn't right." I opened Facebook and found Sarah's post in the family group timestamped 2 hours ago. "I'm heartbroken to share that my sister is trying to force our elderly parents out of their home. After everything they've done for her, she's chosen money over family. I don't recognise the person she's become. Please keep Mum and Dad in your prayers during this difficult time." The comments below were a chorus of sympathy for Sarah and judgment for me. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were calling me selfish, heartless, cruel. Nobody asked for my side. Nobody questioned Sarah's narrative. They'd made their choice about who to believe, just like they always had. I showed Margaret that evening sitting in her apartment while she made tea with hands that shook slightly with rage. "They're trying to isolate you," she said. "Make you look like the villain so no one questions their behaviour. It's a classic abuser tactic." "I know," I said. "I just didn't expect it to work so well." "Then you need to protect yourself," Margaret said firmly. "Kim, that house is legally yours. You have every right to install security cameras. If they're planning something, you need evidence." The idea felt invasive at first, but Margaret was right. If they were willing to forge documents and hire creative lawyers, I needed to know what they were planning. I contacted a security company the next day. They could install discrete cameras in common areas within 48 hours. The living room, kitchen, entry hall, anywhere, conversations might happen that I needed recorded. It felt like espionage against my own family, But then again, they'd been deceiving me for 15 years. Turnabout was fair play. On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the foreclosure notice confrontation, I received a certified letter at my office. My hands shook slightly as I signed for it. Ms. Thompson. It read in formal legal language. You are cordially invited to a family mediation session this Sunday at 2 p.m. at the residence of Robert and Linda Thompson. A neutral mediator will be present to help facilitate productive dialogue and reach an amicable resolution. We hope you'll attend in the spirit of family unity and reconciliation. It was signed by my parents, but at the bottom was a note. Mediator James Davidson Esquire, Family Dispute Resolution Specialist. I stared at that name. James Davidson. The same name I'd heard Sarah say on the phone. Miss Davidson. Yes, I need a lawyer, not a good lawyer, a creative one. This wasn't a mediator. This was Sarah's hired gun, masquerading as a neutral party. This was the trap carefully constructed and baited with the promise of reconciliation. I called Patricia immediately. They're setting you up, she confirmed after I read her the letter. Davidson isn't a mediator, he's a property attorney with a reputation for aggressive tactics. If you go to that meeting, he'll pressure you to sign something. Don't sign anything without me reviewing it first. I'm going, I said, but I'm going prepared. That weekend, while my family prepared their trap, I prepared my own defence. The security cameras were installed Saturday morning. The forensic document examiner had my samples and would have preliminary results by Monday. I met with Patricia to review strategy and printed copies of all my evidence mortgage payments, the inheritance documents, everything. And on Sunday morning, I dressed in my armour again. Professional clothes, hair pulled back the burgundy folder, updated with new documents, and drove toward what I knew would be a battlefield disguised as a family meeting. I had no illusions about what they wanted. They wanted me to surrender, to sign away my rights, to disappear back into invisibility. But I'd learnt something important over the past week. Invisible people can see everything. And what I'd seen had taught me exactly how dangerous my family really was. The question wasn't whether they'd attack. The question was whether I was ready to defend myself. I looked at my reflection in the car mirror before getting out, seeing the same calm expression I'd worn through every confrontation. The difference was, this time I wasn't afraid. Let them spring their trap. I had one of my own. I walked into my parents' house at exactly 2 o'clock to find the living room transformed into something resembling a makeshift courtroom. The coffee table had been cleared and pushed against the wall. 4 chairs faced 2 others across an empty space like opposing sides ready for battle. My parents sat in 2 of the chairs dressed more formally than I'd seen them in years. Sarah occupied the 3rd, her expression carefully neutral. The 4th chair was empty, presumably for me. Across from them sat 2 men I didn't recognise. One was in his 50s, balding, wearing an expensive suit that screamed attorney. The other was younger, nervous-looking, holding a leather portfolio embossed with an official-looking seal. James Davidson, I presumed, and his accomplice. Kimberly, my mother said, her voice warm and welcoming, like we were gathering for Sunday brunch instead of an ambush. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. I remained standing, taking in the room. The security cameras I'd had installed were invisible, tucked into smoke detector housings, signs, and picture frames. Everything that happened here would be recorded, backed up to cloud storage that only I could access. Ms. Thompson, the suited man said, standing to extend his hand. James Davidson. I'm here as a neutral mediator to help facilitate a productive conversation between you and your family. This is Mr. Peters, a notary public, here to witness any agreements we might reach. A notary public. They were so confident I'd signed something they'd brought someone to make it official. I didn't shake Davidson's hand. Instead, I walked to the empty chair and sat down, placing my burgundy folder on my lap, but not opening it. not yet. I appreciate you coming, Davidson continued, settling back into his chair with the ease of someone who thought he controlled the room. I understand there's been some confusion about property ownership at this address. Your family has asked me to help clarify the situation. There's no confusion, I said calmly. My name is on the title deed as joint owner. I've been making all mortgage payments for 5 years. The bank sent foreclosure notices because I stopped paying. Everything is quite clear. Davidson's smile didn't waver. Actually, Ms. Thompson, we've uncovered some documentation that raises significant questions about that narrative. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and spread several documents across the small table they'd set up between us. I recognized the format, immediately bank transfer receipts, but different from mine. These showed payments from an account under my parents' names. These records show your parents have been making regular mortgage contributions for the past 3 years, Davidson said, which contradicts your claim that you've been the sole payer. I looked at the receipts without touching them. The Photoshop work was good, I had to admit. The fonts matched the numbers aligned properly. If I hadn't known they were fake, I might have been fooled. Interesting, I said. May I see the account numbers on those transfers? Davidson's smile flickered slightly. That's not relevant to... because I can call the bank right now and verify whether those account numbers exist and whether any payments were made from them. I pulled out my phone. Should I do that? That won't be necessary, my father interjected quickly. Kim, we're not here to argue about details. We're here to resolve this as a family. Then there's this, Davidson continued, producing another document. This one I didn't recognize a single sheet of paper with my signature at the bottom. A waiver you signed 5 years ago, acknowledging you were added to the title deed only as a formality to help your parents secure better refinancing rates. You explicitly stated you had no ownership interest in the property. The signature looked perfect, exactly like mine. If I hadn't become intimately familiar with forged signatures over the past week, thanks to the inheritance documents, I might have doubted myself. I never signed that, I said. Your signature says otherwise, Davidson replied. And finally, we have this. He pressed play on a small recording device. My own voice filled the room tinny through the speaker. I don't really care about the house. It doesn't matter to me. The words were mine. I recognized them from the dinner trap a week ago, but they'd been cut and spliced, removed from the context of the careful, neutral responses I'd given to my mother's manipulative questions. As you can hear, Davidson said, you've stated clearly you have no interest in the property, yet now you're using a technicality to threaten your family's housing security. My parents were watching me with expressions of hurt and betrayal, so convincing I might have believed them if I didn't know better. Sarah had tears gathering in her eyes. Ms. Thompson, Davidson continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. I need to be frank with you. If you contest this, if you continue claiming ownership of this property, through what appears to be fraudulent means, we'll have no choice but to file charges. You could face criminal prosecution for making false property claims for elder abuse, through financial exploitation, and for filing a false foreclosure notice. The words were designed to terrify me, to make me see myself through their lens, a criminal, a con artist, someone who'd manipulated her elderly parents. You could face significant jail time, Davidson added, legal fees that will bankrupt you, a criminal record that will destroy your career, or, he pushed a document across the table toward me, you can sign this simple settlement agreement today. You acknowledge the title issue was an error, you release all claims to the property, and we all walk away. Your parents will even agree not to seek compensation for the distress this has caused them. How generous. My mother leaned forward right on cue. Kim, sweetheart, please. We don't want to take you to court. We don't want to see you in legal trouble. Just sign the paper. Let's put this behind us and be a family again. Please, honey, my father added, his voice breaking slightly. Don't force us to do this the hard way. They all watched me, waiting for the moment when I'd break, when the fear would overwhelm me, when I'd reach for the pen Mr. Peters was holding out ready to notarize my surrender. Instead, I reached into my purse. Everyone leaned forward slightly, expecting to see me pull out a pen, expecting compliance, expecting me to be who I'd always been, the one who gave in, who backed down, who couldn't stand up to pressure. But my hand emerged holding something else entirely. A small digital recording device. Professional quality, the kind that holds up in court. I placed it gently on the table between us, right next to Davidson's fake evidence. "This has been recording since I walked in the door," I said calmly. "Would you like to hear it played back, the part where you, Mr. Davidson, presented forged bank statements, or maybe the part where you threatened me with false criminal charges?" The room went completely silent. Davidson's face had gone pale. Mr. Peters looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. My parents exchanged panicked glances, finally understanding that something had gone very, very wrong with their plan. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, watching the panic spread across their faces, like ripples in water. Then, I opened my burgundy folder. "Before we continue," I said, my voice steady and professional, "I should clarify a few things. Mr. Davidson, you're not a mediator. You're a property attorney Sarah hired to intimidate me into signing away my legal rights. I have a recording of her phone call to you from 9 days ago, where she specifically requested someone creative who could help her steal a house from her sister." I pulled out my phone and played the audio I'd recorded in my apartment hallway. Sarah's voice emerged crystal clear. "I need someone who can fix this situation. Money isn't an issue. How soon can we meet?" Sarah's face went white. Davidson opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly recalculating every decision that had led him to this moment. "Now, about this evidence you've presented." I picked up the forged waiver with one finger, like it might contaminate me. "This signature is quite good. Almost perfect, actually. So, I hired a forensic document examiner to analyze it. I placed a bound report on the table, the official seal of Midwest Forensic Services, visible on the cover. Dr. Patricia Morrison examined this signature against authentic samples of my handwriting from 15 years ago. She found 15 distinct points of deviation. The pressure patterns are wrong. The stroke angles don't match. The pen lift points are inconsistent with my natural writing pattern. I flipped the report open to a page full of comparison images, arrows, and circles highlighting the differences. This is a forgery, a felony-level forgery. Mr. Peters made a small sound like a wounded animal. Davidson's hand moved toward the document, then stopped, as if he'd realized touching it would only incriminate him further. As for your recording of me saying I don't care about the house, I continued, that audio was edited, taken out of context from a dinner conversation where I was being very careful to give neutral responses to leading questions. I have the full, unedited recording from that evening. Would you like to hear how my mother was trying to get me to make incriminating statements, while you, Mr. Davidson, probably coached her on what to ask? My mother actually gasped. Kim, we didn't. And then there are these cameras, I said, gesturing around the room. You see, as a legal owner of this property, I have every right to install security equipment. I did so 6 days ago. These cameras have been recording everything that happens in the common areas of this house. I pulled out my tablet and opened the security app, turning the screen so they could see the grid of camera feeds. Their faces appeared on screen, staring back at themselves in real time. 3 days ago, I continued swiping to a saved video file. These cameras recorded Mr. Peters and Sarah entering this house at 10 in the morning when my parents were conveniently out grocery shopping. I pressed play. The footage showed Sarah leading the nervous notary through the front door, both of them glancing around to make sure they were alone. The audio caught Sarah's voice clearly. My old bedroom. We'll put the document in her desk drawer. so it looks like it's been there for years. On screen, they walked upstairs. The angle didn't capture the bedroom itself, but the intent was clear. Mr. Peters stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I didn't know she said it was just, 'I need to leave.'" His voice was high and panicked. He grabbed his leather portfolio and headed for the door without another word, practically running. No one tried to stop him. We all watched him flee, and the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Davidson had his phone out now, probably texting his malpractice insurance carrier. His expression had gone from confident to desperately concerned about his own legal liability. "But we're not done," I said, because they needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done, what they'd been doing for years. I pulled out the final documents. The grandmother's codicil with its handwritten bequest, the forged waiver with my signature claiming I'd declined $45,000, the bank record showing that money going to Sarah's wedding. 15 years ago, I said, laying them out one by one. My grandmother left me $45,000 and a cottage in Ashford County. She left it specifically to me because, and I quote, "This grandchild has been ignored too long. I never received that inheritance. Instead, someone," I looked directly at Sarah, "forged my signature on a waiver saying I declined the bequest. That $45,000 paid for your wedding. The cottage was sold and the money split between you and our parents." My father tried to speak. "Kim, we can explain. You forged legal documents," I continued, my voice cutting through his attempt at explanation. "You committed inheritance fraud, and 15 years later you tried to do it again with this house. 2 separate frauds, 15 years apart, both designed to steal from me while making it look like I'd given everything away willingly." I closed my folder and looked at each of them in turn. My parents, who'd raised me to be invisible. Sarah, who'd built her entire life on money that should have been mine. And Davidson, who'd agreed to help them commit fraud without asking enough questions. "Mr. Davidson," I said, "I suggest you leave now and consult with your legal counsel. You've just been recorded presenting forged documents and making false threats of criminal prosecution. The State Bar Association will be very interested in this behaviour." Davidson stood slowly, his expensive suit suddenly looking wilted. "Ms. Thompson, I was given certain information by my client that appears to have been inaccurate. I was not aware of the full situation." "You mean you didn't verify any of it before threatening me with prison?" I said. "I understand. Your bar complaint hearing will be a great opportunity to explain that decision." He left almost as quickly as the notary had the door closing behind him with finality. That left just me and my family surrounded by the wreckage of their failed conspiracy and the evidence of their betrayal. The question now was what I would do with all this power I'd accumulated. And for the first time in my life, they had absolutely no idea what I would choose. They sat frozen in their chairs, 3 people who looked like my family but felt like strangers. The silence was absolute except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second marking time they couldn't get back choices they couldn't unmake. I could have left then. I'd won. I had enough evidence to prosecute them criminally, to sue them civilly, to destroy what remained of their lives. I had power I'd never possessed before, and they knew it. But sitting there looking at them, I realised that's not what I actually wanted. "I don't want your excuses," I said quietly. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "I don't want your justifications or your explanations about how you meant well or how circumstances forced your hand. I want answers to 3 questions. Real answers, not the things you tell yourselves to sleep at night. The truth." My mother's hands twisted in her lap. My father stared at the floor. Sarah's carefully applied makeup was running with genuine tears now, not the fake ones she'd prepared for the performance. "Question 1, I said, looking at my parents. "Why did you hide grandmother's will? Not the main will, but the codicil where she specifically left me $45,000 and the cottage. Why did you forge my signature and steal money? My grandmother wanted me to have..." The clock ticked. 5 seconds. 10. 15. My father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah needed it more. I needed it too, I said. I was 20 years old, working 2 jobs to pay for college, eating ramen noodles for dinner because I couldn't afford real food. But you didn't ask me if I needed it. You just took it. You were always so responsible, my mother said, her voice shaking. You would have saved it or used it for something practical. Sarah had dreams. She wanted a beautiful wedding, a business of her own. She had potential that needed nurturing. And I didn't. The question came out more wounded than I'd intended. I had no potential, no dreams worth nurturing. They couldn't answer that, couldn't explain why Sarah's dreams mattered more than mine without admitting what we all knew they'd chosen. They'd always chosen, and I was the one they chose against. Question 2, I said, turning to Sarah, my sister, who'd watched me get slapped 20 times and pulled out her phone. Why did you use my information to open credit accounts in my name? I found the records. 3 different credit cards, all showing your spending patterns. You committed identity theft against your own sister. Sarah's crying intensified, but I waited. I'd spent 35 years accommodating her tears backing down when she got emotional. Not anymore. Answer me, I said when the crying continued without words. I didn't think you'd notice, she finally choked out. You're so careful with money. You always have savings. I thought you could afford it, and I needed it. The photography business wasn't bringing in enough. Tyler needed things. I was drowning. So you stole from me, I said. You stole my credit, damaged my financial standing, and assumed I'd just, never check, never care. I was going to pay it back, she whispered, but we both knew that was a lie. How much? I asked. How much did you steal? $18,000. The words were barely audible. Over 3 years. $18,000. Added to the $45,000 from the inheritance, added to the $72,000 in mortgage payments. They'd taken over $100,000 from me, and I'd never even known until now. I let that number sit in the air between us, let them feel the weight of it. Question 3, I said, and this was the one that scared me. The one I wasn't sure I wanted, answered because I knew the truth might break something in me that hadn't already been broken. Why doesn't anyone in this family love me? The words came out smaller than I'd intended, more vulnerable. I'd meant to ask it with strength, with accusation, but instead it emerged as the question that 8-year-old Kim had asked herself waiting alone at school. That 16-year-old Kim had wondered eating birthday cake alone in the kitchen. That 35-year-old Kim had been too afraid to voice until this moment. Complete silence. My mother's tears fell faster, but she didn't speak. My father's hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white, but he didn't answer. Sarah just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read, shock maybe, or horror that I'd finally said it out loud. I counted the seconds. 30, 60, 90, 2 full minutes of silence where not one of them could find an answer. Not one of them could say, "That's not true, we do love you." Not one of them could explain or justify or make it make sense. Because the truth was too ugly to speak aloud. The truth was that they'd made me the invisible one, the lesser one, the one whose needs didn't matter, and they'd done it so thoroughly and for so long that they couldn't even remember why. Or maybe they'd never needed a reason at all. I stood slowly gathering my evidence, putting everything back in my folder. My legs felt shaky, but I kept my expression neutral. You have 72 hours, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. 72 hours to decide what kind of people you want to be. Whether you want to face this honestly or keep lying. Whether you want to make this right or keep pretending you did nothing wrong. I walked toward the door, then stopped with my hand on the knob. I have enough evidence to prosecute all of you for fraud. The inheritance theft, the identity theft, the forged property waiver, all of it. I could have you arrested. I could sue you for everything. I could make sure everyone in the family knows exactly what you did. I turned back to look at them one last time. But what I actually want is simpler than that. I want you to choose to be better, to admit what you did, to understand why it was wrong, to face consequences, not because I forced them on you, but because you recognize you owe them. I opened the door. 72 hours, I repeated, choose wisely. And I walked out, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their lives, finally forced to confront the people they'd become. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could steady my hands enough to drive. The recording device sat on the passenger seat next to my folder. Physical proof of everything that had just happened. Physical proof that I'd finally stood up for myself. Physical proof that they'd sat in silence rather than tell me they loved me. That last part hurt more than all the fraud combined. By the time I pulled into the parking garage of Patricia Chen's office building, I'd managed to compartmentalize the emotional devastation into a box I'd deal with later. Right now, I needed to be strategic. I needed to think clearly about the next 72 hours. Patricia was waiting in her office, despite it being Sunday, a testament to how seriously she was taking this case. She listened, without interrupting, as I recounted the entire meeting, showed her the recordings described the lawyer's fake evidence and the notary's panicked escape. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and whistled softly. Kim, what they did in that meeting was a felony. Multiple felonies. Presenting forged documents suborning perjury conspiracy to commit fraud. James Davidson is going to have a very bad week when the State Bar hears about this. You're filing a complaint against him. Already drafted, Patricia said, turning her laptop screen toward me. The complaint was comprehensive, citing specific ethical violations with timestamps from my recording. He knowingly participated in a scheme to defraud you of property through fabricated evidence. That's not just malpractice. That's criminal conduct. I scanned the document. It was damning. Davidson's career was effectively over the moment this got filed. What about criminal charges against my family? I asked. What are my options there? Patricia pulled up another document, this one, outlining potential charges. The inheritance fraud 15 years ago. That's forgery theft by deception, possibly elder abuse since they manipulated your grandmother's testamentary intent. The identity theft, that's a federal crime. Today's property fraud attempt, more forgery conspiracy attempted theft. Conservatively, we're looking at combined potential sentences of 5 to 15 years in prison if everything gets prosecuted fully. The numbers made my stomach turn. 5 to 15 years. My parents were in their 60s. Sarah had a 12-year-old son. Do you want to press charges? Patricia asked gently, watching my face. I thought about Tyler growing up with his mother in prison. I thought about my parents elderly and broken in an orange jumpsuit. I thought about the satisfaction I'd feel watching them face consequences, and how empty that satisfaction would probably be once the initial vindication wore off. Not yet, I said finally. I don't want to force consequences on them. I want them to choose accountability. Patricia studied me for a moment. That's a risk. You give them time, they might use it to destroy evidence or flee. They won't, I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. They're too shocked right now, too disorganized. They're not criminal masterminds, they're just selfish people who never thought they'd get caught. What do you want instead? Patricia asked. I want them to face what they've done, I said, trying to articulate something I was still figuring out myself. Revenge is making them hurt, but justice is making them understand. I want justice, but on my terms, not the state's terms. Mine. Patricia nodded slowly. Then we need to give them a clear choice, a deadline, consequences if they don't comply. We spent the next hour drafting a letter. It was formal, legal, and absolutely clear about what would happen if they didn't respond appropriately. Patricia printed it on her firm's letterhead, signed it as my legal representative, and sealed it in an envelope. "I'll have this hand-delivered tomorrow morning," she said, certified with proof of receipt. The 72-hour countdown starts when they sign for it. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the silence after my third question, kept seeing my mother's face when she couldn't say she loved me, kept hearing my father's admission that Sarah needed it more, as if my needs had never factored into the equation at all. Monday morning at 8 a.m, a courier delivered the letter to my parents' house. I got the confirmation text at 8:12, received and signed for by Robert Thompson. The 72 hours had officially begun. The letter was comprehensive. It outlined every piece of evidence I possessed. It detailed the potential criminal charges they faced. It explained that I had the power to prosecute or to settle, and which path I chose would depend entirely on their actions over the next 3 days. In 72 hours, the letter concluded, I will make my final decision about whether to pursue criminal prosecution or to accept a comprehensive settlement agreement. Your actions during this time, your honesty, your willingness to admit wrongdoing, your efforts toward genuine accountability will determine which path I choose. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is me giving you the chance to save yourselves by choosing to be better people than you've been for the past 35 years. Choose wisely. I'd added that last line myself over Patricia's legal caution. She'd wanted something more formal, more distant. But I needed them to understand this wasn't just about law. It was about character, about the kind of people they decided to be when finally forced to confront their actions. My phone started ringing within an hour of the letter's delivery. My mother, my father, Sarah, all of them calling, texting, trying to reach me. I didn't answer. The letter had said everything that needed to be said. Now I needed to see what they would do with the space I'd given them. Would they use it to attack me further, to destroy evidence, to hire better lawyers and prepare for war? Or would they use it to finally, after 35 years, choose accountability? I had 72 hours to find out. And in that time, I'd discover whether the people who'd raised me had any capacity for growth, or whether they were so fundamentally broken that the only justice possible was the cold, hard kind, delivered by a judge in a courtroom. The countdown had begun. I lasted until Tuesday morning before I checked the security camera footage. I told myself I was being strong by not watching, by not obsessing over their reactions. But the truth was, I needed to know. Needed to see if they were capable of the kind of reckoning I demanded. I made coffee, sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, and accessed the cloud storage where 48 hours of footage was waiting. I started with Monday afternoon, a few hours after the letter had been delivered. The first thing I saw was my parents sitting at the kitchen table, the letter spread between them. My mother was crying, but this time the tears looked different, not performative, just defeated. My father was pacing, and even through the grainy security footage, I could see the anger radiating from him. "How could you let this happen?" he shouted at my mother, his voice loud enough to be picked up clearly by the camera's microphone. "You said Kim would never find out about the inheritance. You said it was foolproof. Don't you dare blame this on me." My mother's voice cracked with rage I'd never heard from her before. "You're the one who suggested hiding the will in the first place. You said Kim wouldn't care, that she'd understand family needs come first." I said that because you were already planning to give the money to Sarah. I was trying to justify what you'd already decided. I sat frozen, watching my parents turn on each other for the first time in my memory. 35 years of presenting a united front, of backing each other's decisions no matter how wrong, and it was all crumbling under the pressure of finally being held accountable. "This is your fault for always favouring Sarah," my father shouted. "You made that girl think she could do no wrong, and now look at us. We're going to lose everything because you couldn't treat your daughters equally. My fault. My mother stood up so fast her chair fell backward. You're the one who signed off on every credit card Sarah opened in Kim's name. You're the one who helped forge that property waiver. Don't act like you're innocent in this. The footage continued with variations of the same argument for another 20 minutes before Sarah walked in, Tyler trailing behind her. The boy looked scared, younger than his 12 years, clutching his phone like a security blanket. What's going on? Sarah asked, though the letter was right there on the table. She'd obviously read it already. This was performance, an attempt to pretend she didn't understand the magnitude of what was happening. What's going on is that your sister has enough evidence to send all of us to prison, my father snapped. That's what's going on. We have 48 hours to figure out what we're going to do. Prison. Tyler's voice was small, frightened. Mum, what's he talking about? Sarah knelt down to her son's level, her face a mask of forced calm. Nothing, baby. Grandpa's just upset. It's going to be fine. But Tyler wasn't stupid. I watched him look from face to face, seeing the panic they couldn't quite hide, and something shifted in his expression. Maybe for the first time he was understanding that actions had consequences, that adults couldn't fix everything, that his family wasn't invincible. Is this because I hit Aunt Kim? He asked quietly. Is she mad at me? The room went silent. Through the camera, I saw all three adults exchange glances. No, sweetheart, Sarah said, but even she didn't sound convinced. This is about grown-up stuff, legal stuff. It's not your fault. But Tyler pulled away from her and walked toward the stairs. Everyone's fighting. Everyone's crying. This feels like when you and Dad got divorced. He looked back at his mother. You said that wasn't my fault either, but it was. I heard you arguing about me. He disappeared upstairs, and moments later I heard a door slam through the audio feed. The adults sat in silence for a long moment. If Kim presses charges, Sarah finally whispered, if I go to prison, what happens to Tyler? Child services, my mother said, her voice hollow. He'd go into foster care, or to his father if Justin wants him. I watched Sarah's face crumble, genuine terror replacing the fake emotions she'd been performing for years. This was real. Her son, her life, everything she'd built on stolen money and forged documents, all of it was about to collapse. We need to call Kim, my father said. We need to apologize, to explain, to make her understand. Understand what? My mother interrupted bitterly. That we've been stealing from her for 15 years, that we forged documents and committed fraud. What exactly is there to explain? I fast-forwarded through several hours of similar arguments, through footage of my parents sleeping on opposite ends of their bed for what looked like the first time ever, through Sarah pacing in the guest room until 3 a.m. Tuesday morning, with 48 hours left on the deadline, my phone started ringing again. Sarah, my mother, my father, all of them trying to reach me. I let every call go to voicemail, every text go unread. Around noon, the security camera at my apartment building's front entrance sent me a motion alert. I switched cameras and saw my parents standing at the intercom pressing my buzzer repeatedly. Kim, please. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker. We need to talk to you. We need to explain. Please, sweetheart, just let us in. I sat on my couch watching them on my phone screen. Part of me wanted to go down there to hear what they had to say, but a stronger part remembered the silence after my third question. Remembered that they'd had 35 years to see me, to value me, to love me. 48 hours wasn't going to change who they fundamentally were. After 15 minutes, they gave up and left. I switched back to the house cameras and saw them return home defeated. Sarah was waiting in the living room and I could see she'd been crying. She won't answer, my mother reported. She won't even open the door. Then I'll go, Sarah said, standing up with sudden determination. I'll go to her apartment. I'll wait outside if I have to. I'll apologize. She always forgives people. That's who Kim is. She'll forgive this too. I watched her grab her car keys, and something about her confidence made my stomach turn. Even now, even with everything exposed, Sarah still believed she could manipulate me. Still believed that my forgiveness was a given, a resource she could tap into whenever consequences got too uncomfortable. She had no idea that the woman she'd been counting on, the one who apologized for things that weren't her fault, who shrank herself to keep the peace, who swallowed hurt to maintain family harmony, didn't exist anymore. That woman had died the moment they chose silence over "I love you." But Sarah was about to find out the hard way. With 24 hours remaining on the deadline, she was coming to my apartment to deliver an apology she thought I'd accept, and I was going to show her exactly what 35 years of being invisible had taught me about seeing through lies. Sarah arrived at my apartment 40 minutes after I watched her leave her parents' house on the security feed. I'd had time to make tea to center myself to prepare for the performance I knew was coming. When the knock came, I opened the door to find my sister holding a bouquet of pink roses, my least favourite flower, though she'd never bothered to learn that. Her eyes were red and puffy, her makeup expertly smudged to look like she'd been crying for hours. She was wearing a soft grey cardigan that made her look vulnerable and small. "Kim," she said, her voice breaking on my name. "Thank you for opening the door. I wasn't sure you would." I stepped aside to let her in, but didn't invite her to sit. She stood in my small living room clutching the flowers like a prop in a play, and I waited. "I'm so sorry," she began, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Kim, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've hurt you. I know I've been terrible. I was jealous of you, and I let that jealousy turn me into someone I don't recognize." The words sounded rehearsed, practiced in front of a mirror, probably on the drive over. They hit all the right emotional notes: vulnerability, self-awareness, regret. They would have worked on the old Kim, the one who wanted so desperately to believe her family could change. "What specifically are you sorry for?" I asked, my voice neutral. Sarah blinked, thrown by the question. What? "You said you're sorry for everything," I clarified. "I'm asking you to be specific. What actions are you apologizing for?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out the right answer. "For hurting you, for taking you for granted, for not being the sister you deserved." Still vague, still avoiding the specifics of what she'd actually done. "Are you sorry for stealing $45,000 from my inheritance?" I asked. "For forging my signature on legal documents? For opening credit cards in my name and running up $18,000 in debt? For living rent-free in a house I was paying for? For teaching your son it was okay to hit me for watching him do it and doing nothing?" With each item, Sarah's face went paler. The tears kept falling, but now they looked less performative and more like genuine panic. "I never meant for any of that to go so far," she said. It snowballed. One bad decision led to another, and I didn't know how to stop it." "Did you try?" I asked. "Did you ever, at any point in the past 15 years, try to stop stealing from me?" She couldn't answer that, couldn't explain how every single theft had been a choice, a conscious decision to take something that wasn't hers. "I was desperate," she finally said. "After my divorce, I had nothing. Tyler and I were barely surviving. I made mistakes, I know that now. But Kim, I'm your sister. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't family mean we forgive each other? Family should also mean you don't steal from each other," I said. "It should mean you don't watch your child assault your sister. It should mean you don't commit fraud. But apparently, those rules only apply to me." Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to something that might have been genuine desperation. "Kim, please, can you please not press charges? Tyler needs his mother. He's just a boy. He doesn't deserve to lose his mum because of mistakes I made." And there it was, the real motive. The actual reason she'd come here with flowers and tears and practiced apologies. Not because she understood what she'd done wrong. not because she wanted to make amends, but because she was facing consequences and wanted me to rescue her from them, just like always. "You're not sorry for what you did," I said quietly. "You're sorry you got caught. Those are very different things, Sarah." "That's not fair," she protested. "I am sorry. I'm trying to apologize. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to understand," I said. "I want you to genuinely comprehend what you did and why it was wrong. I want you to feel remorse, not regret that you can't keep doing it. But you can't give me that, can you?" Sarah's mask of vulnerability was cracking now, frustration and anger bleeding through. "So what, you're going to send me to prison? You're going to destroy Tyler's life to prove a point?" "I'm going to hold you accountable," I corrected. "What that accountability looks like depends on whether you choose to actually face what you've done or keep trying to manipulate your way out of it." "I came here to apologize." Sarah's voice was rising now, the tears drying up as anger replaced fear. "I'm standing here humbling myself, trying to make this right, and you're being cold and unforgiving. This is who you really are, Kim. This is the real you, vindictive and cruel." I looked at my sister, this woman who'd taken so much from me, and still believed she was the victim in this story, and I felt nothing but tired sadness. "Please, leave," I said. "Kim, leave, now." She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally realizing that tears and flowers and vague apologies weren't going to work, that I'd changed in a way she couldn't manipulate back. She dropped the roses on my coffee table and walked to the door. But before she could leave, I spoke again. "Sarah, wait." She turned back, hope flickering across her face. Maybe she thought I was going to relent, going to be the old Kim who always gave in. "There's one person who needs to apologize more than you," I said. "Send him tomorrow. If he can give me what you couldn't, maybe there's a path forward that doesn't end with criminal charges." Understanding dawned on her face. "Tyler." I wanted to hear from Tyler. "He's just a child," she said, her voice small. "He's old enough to hit me 20 times, I replied. "He's old enough to apologize for it." Sarah left without another word, and I stood alone in my apartment, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway. The roses sat on my coffee table, already wilting, a reminder of how surface level her attempt at amends had been. 24 hours remained on the deadline, and I just made it clear that what happened next depended not on the adults who'd been stealing from me for years, but on a 12-year-old boy who'd been taught that I didn't matter. The question was whether he'd been taught too well, or whether there was still something in him that could be reached. I'd find out tomorrow. Tyler stood in my doorway, looking nothing like the arrogant child who'd slapped me 3 weeks ago. He was wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, his hands shoved deep in the pockets, his eyes fixed on his sneakers. The expensive ones he'd screamed at me about were scuffed and now one shoelace untied. "Hi," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He hesitated, then shuffled past me into the apartment. I'd set up my small kitchen table with 2 chairs facing each other, not across a distance, but close enough to have a real conversation. I'd made hot chocolate, remembering that he was still just 12 years old, despite everything that had happened. "Sit down," I said gently. "Would you like something to drink?" He shook his head, but sat in the chair I'd indicated, his body language defensive, and closed off. His leg bounced nervously under the table. I sat across from him and waited. I'd learned over the past weeks that silence could be more powerful than any question, that sometimes people needed space to choose their own words. After almost a full minute, Tyler spoke without looking up. "Mom said I had to come here and apologize so you won't send her to jail. Honest, at least. No pretense that this was his idea." "Is that the only reason you came?" I asked. He shrugged, a gesture that tried to be casual but came across as scared. "I don't know. I guess I don't understand what's happening. Everyone's fighting. Mum's crying all the time. Grandma and Grandpa yell at each other. And they keep saying it's because of what I did to you, but that doesn't make sense because they all laughed when it happened. There it was, the confusion of a child trying to make sense of adult hypocrisy. Can I ask you something, Tyler? I said. Why did you hit me? His leg bounced faster. You have spilled soda on my shoes. It was an accident, I said. You jerked your arm, we both know that. So why did you hit me? The silence stretched longer this time. I could see him struggling with something, his jaw clenching and unclenching. Because I could, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Because Mom said you were the loser sister. She said you were poor and alone and nobody important. She said if I was nice to you, if I ended up like you, I'd be nothing. The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd suspected something like this. Hearing it confirmed, hearing that Sarah had actively taught her son to despise me, was different than suspecting it. She said you were weak. Tyler continued, his words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. That you let people walk all over you. That you'd never stand up for yourself. And when I hit you, and you just stood there when nobody stopped, I thought she was right. I thought you were nothing. Tears were running down his face now, though he still wasn't looking at me. But then, everything changed, he said. And now, Mum's scared all the time, and Grandma keeps crying, and I heard them talking about money you gave them, and how you were paying for the house, and I don't understand. If you're nothing, why do they need you so much? I reached across the table slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, and touched his hand gently. He flinched, but didn't retreat. Tyler, can I tell you something? I asked. Your mum lied to you about who I am, about what I've done, about a lot of things. He looked up at me for the first time, his eyes red and confused. Do you remember your birthday gifts every year? I asked. The remote control car when you were 7. The gaming console when you were 10. The concert tickets last year. He nodded. I bought all of those. Me. Not your mum. She told you she did, but every single birthday and Christmas gift you've gotten came from me. His mouth opened slightly, processing this. And your school trip to Washington, D.C. last year, the one your mum said she'd been saving for, I paid for that too. $2,000 so you could go with your class. But why? Tyler asked, his voice cracking. Why would you do that if I was mean to you? Because you're my nephew, I said simply. Because I wanted you to have good things. Because I hoped that maybe if I showed you kindness, you'd learn to be kind too. Tyler's face crumpled. I hit you, and everyone watched, and I thought I was strong, but I wasn't. I was just mean. Do you know where you learned that? I asked gently. Your grandfather treated your grandmother this way. He favoured your mum over me, made me invisible, taught me my feelings didn't matter. Then he treated me the same way. Your mum learned from him that it was okay to treat people like they were less than human, and she taught you. This pattern has been going on for 4 generations. Tyler was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking. I didn't know. I didn't know any of that. I know you didn't, I said. You're 12. You believed what the adults told you. But Tyler, you have a choice now that you didn't have before. You can keep following that pattern. Keep treating people the way you were taught. Or you can be the one who breaks the cycle. He looked at me with those young eyes full of confusion and something that might have been hope. How do I break it? I squeezed his hand gently. By seeing other people's pain. By understanding that your actions affect real human beings with real feelings. By choosing differently than the people who came before you. I'm sorry, he whispered. Aunt Kim, I'm really, really sorry. Not because Mum said I had to be, because I am. Because I hurt you and that was wrong, and I can't take it back, but I wish I could. These words from a 12-year-old child held more genuine remorse than anything the adults in my family had managed to express. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you for that." We sat there for a moment in the weight of that apology, and I saw in his face something I hadn't seen in any of the adults' actual understanding. Actual change happening in real time. "Tyler," I said, "you asked how to break the cycle. Here's how, by seeing other people's pain and choosing differently. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I want to. I don't want to be like who I was." "Then that's where we start," I said. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something close to hope. A knock at my door interrupted the moment. I texted Margaret earlier, letting her know Tyler was coming, and I wasn't surprised to see her standing in the hallway when I opened it. "I hope I'm not intruding," Margaret said, her eyes moving past me to where Tyler sat at the table, quickly wiping his face with his sleeve. "But I think I have something this young man needs to hear." Tyler looked at me with uncertain eyes, and I nodded. "Margaret is my friend. She's someone who understands about family and cycles and choices. You should listen to what she has to say." Margaret came in and pulled up a third chair, sitting down, with the careful movements of someone whose joints hurt but whose mind was sharp as ever. She looked at Tyler for a long moment, and he squirmed under her gaze. "What's your name, son?" she asked, though I'd told her already. "Tyler," he said quietly. "Tyler, I'm 78 years old. I've lived a long life, made a lot of mistakes, and learned things the hard way. The hardest way possible, actually." She folded her hands on the table. 50 years ago, I had a daughter. Beautiful girl, Emily. She married a man who hurt her. Not right away, these things never start right away. But slowly over time, he got meaner, more controlling. He hit her sometimes. Tyler's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. "Emily came to me 6 times in the last year of her life. She showed me bruises. She told me she was scared. And do you know what I told her?" Margaret's voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. "I told her to try harder, to be patient, to remember her wedding vows, to keep the family together at all costs. I told her that family comes first, always, no matter what." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she continued. "I slapped her once when she talked about leaving him, told her she was being dramatic, told her she was disrespecting the sanctity of marriage. I chose the idea of family over my daughter's actual safety." "What happened?" Tyler whispered. "She died. She was 34 years old. Her husband's abuse escalated, and one day he went too far." Margaret looked directly at Tyler, her eyes fierce despite the tears gathering in them. "I have spent every single day for the past 30 years wishing I could go back, wishing I told her to leave, wishing I'd chosen her safety over my idea of what family should look like." The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of my wall clock. "Tyler, you're 12 years old. You hit your aunt 20 times while 20 adults watched and did nothing. That's not your fault. You're a child who was taught that behavior was acceptable. But now you know better. Now you're sitting here at a crossroads and you have a choice I didn't give my daughter." Margaret leaned forward. "You can admit you were wrong and grow into something better. Or you can defend yourself, make excuses, and become like your mother, someone who hurts people and blames everyone else. You have to choose, and you have to choose fast, because patterns like this get harder to break the longer you follow them." Tyler was crying again, but he didn't try to hide it this time. "I don't want to be like that. I don't want to hurt people." "Then don't," Margaret said simply. "It's that simple and that hard. Every day you'll wake up and have chances to choose, to be kind or cruel, to see people or dismiss them, to grow or stay stuck. Nobody can make those choices for you. Tyler turned to look at me, his face blotchy and tear-stained. Aunt Kim, I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I was mean to you. I'm sorry I believed bad things about you without ever asking if they were true. His voice broke. I'm sorry I hurt you. These weren't his mother's words. These weren't coached or practiced. These were coming from somewhere real inside him, a place that understood what he'd done and why it was wrong. Thank you, Tyler, I said. I accept your apology. I saw relief flood his face, but I held up my hand before he could think we were done. But accepting your apology doesn't mean everything's okay now. It's not okay. You hurt me, and that hurt doesn't disappear just because you said sorry. What it means is that I believe you're sincere, that I believe you want to change, and I'm willing to give you a chance to prove it. How do I prove it? He asked. By becoming the person you want to be, I said. That's the hard part. Saying sorry takes 5 minutes. Actually, changing takes years. It takes work. It takes choosing differently even when it's uncomfortable, even when the people around you are choosing the old way. Tyler nodded, slowly processing this. Can you help me? Can you show me how? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Patricia Chen's name flashed on the screen and my stomach dropped. I looked at the time. It was 5:47 p.m. The deadline I'd set was 8 a.m. tomorrow, but I told Patricia to call me at the 72-hour mark, exactly which would be... I checked the timestamp on the letter delivery. 8:47 a.m. Monday. The 72 hours were up. I need to take this alarm, I said to Tyler and Margaret. It's my lawyer. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door, pressing the phone to my ear. Patricia. Kim, it's time. The 72 hours are up. I need to know your decision. Do we pursue criminal charges or do we accept a settlement? Her voice was professional neutral, giving me no indication of what she thought I should do. I looked at my closed bedroom door, thinking about Tyler on the other side of it, thinking about a 12-year-old boy who'd been taught wrong, but who'd just shown me he was capable of learning right, thinking about breaking cycles and giving people chances, and whether any of that mattered against 15 years of systematic theft and betrayal. Give me 10 minutes, I said. Kim, I need an answer now. The courts. 10 minutes, Patricia, please. She sighed. 10 minutes, then I'm filing whatever you decide. I hung up and stood there in my bedroom staring at the framed photo of my grandmother on the nightstand. What would she tell me to do? I already knew the answer. She'd tell me to choose myself, to stop sacrificing for people who wouldn't sacrifice for me, to let them face the consequences they'd earned. But she'd also written in her will that I was the grandchild who'd been overlooked too long. She'd tried to give me something, tried to help me, tried to see me when no one else would. And Tyler had just seen me, really seen me, for the first time. Was that enough? Could one child's genuine remorse balance out decades of adult cruelty? I had 10 minutes to decide the fate of my entire family, and I still had no idea what I was going to choose. I had 9 minutes left when I opened my bedroom door and walked back into the kitchen. Tyler and Margaret looked up at me, both of them, reading something in my expression that made them go quiet. I need your help, I said to Margaret. I have to make a decision right now, and I don't know what to do. Margaret stood and guided me to sit down at the table. Tyler watched us with wide, uncertain eyes. Tell me your options, Margaret said. Criminal charges or civil settlement, prison or accountability, destruction or consequences. The words tumbled out. Patricia needs an answer in 8 minutes. What does your heart say? Margaret asked. My heart says they deserve to go to prison, I admitted. 15 years of theft, fraud, manipulation. They took over $100,000 from me. They stole my grandmother's gift. They taught a child to hate me. They watched him assault me. They tried to steal my house with forged documents. Tyler flinched at the mention of the assault, but I continued. But my heart also says that Tyler just showed me something real, something that could grow into actual change. And if I send Sarah to prison, he loses his mother. If I send my parents to prison, they die there. They're too old to survive it. So you're torn between justice and mercy, Margaret said. I'm torn between what they deserve and what I can live with, I corrected. Margaret, what would you do if you could go back? If you had this choice about the people who hurt your daughter, what would you choose? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded on the table. I can't answer that, honey, because my situation ended in death. There was no chance for accountability, no possibility of change. The people who should have protected my Emily never faced consequences at all. She looked at Tyler, then back at me. But I can tell you, this consequences and destruction aren't the same thing. You can hold people accountable without annihilating them. You can demand change without requiring blood. My phone showed 7 minutes remaining. Honey, Margaret said gently, have you forgiven them? The question stopped me cold. Forgiveness. The word my family would want to hear, the word they'd use to demand I drop everything and pretend none of this happened. I don't know, I said, honestly. I don't even know what forgiveness means anymore. They'd say forgiveness means going back to how things were, letting them keep hurting me, accepting that this is just how family works. Is that what forgiveness means to you? Margaret asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. No, forgiveness doesn't mean letting them do it again. It means I'm releasing them from my heart. I'm not going to carry this anger forever. I'm not going to let their betrayal define my life. I looked at Margaret. But they still have to face consequences. I can forgive them and still protect myself. I can forgive them and still demand they change. That's exactly right, Margaret said. Real forgiveness is releasing yourself from the anger while they still face what they've done. That's called compassionate accountability. Tyler spoke up quietly. Does that mean you're going to forgive my mum? I don't know yet, I said honestly. Your mum hasn't shown me what you showed me. She apologized, but only because she was scared of prison. You apologized because you understood you hurt me. Those are very different things. I looked at my phone. 5 minutes. People say blood is thicker than water. I said more to myself than to them. My family's used that against me my whole life. Family comes first. Family forgives. Family doesn't hold grudges. But they forget blood can be toxic. And sometimes clean water heals better than poisoned blood. Margaret nodded. You get to choose your family, Kim. Real family isn't about biology. It's about who sees you, who values you, who chooses you back. 3 minutes. I knew what I was going to do. Not because it was easy, not because they deserved mercy, but because I deserved peace. I deserved to make a choice I could live with for the rest of my life. I need to call Patricia, I said, standing up. Back in my bedroom, I dialed with 2 minutes to spare. Patricia, I've made my decision. Option B, civil settlement with my terms. But they're going to be strict, enforceable, and permanent. I could hear her typing. Tell me what you want. And I did. For the next hour, while Tyler and Margaret waited in my kitchen, Patricia and I drafted a settlement that would hold my family accountable without destroying them. Terms that had teeth, consequences that mattered. When we finally finished, Patricia read the terms back to me. These are harsh, Kim. They're going to fight this. They can fight it, or they can face criminal charges. I said, their choice. Sending it now, Patricia said. I heard the whoosh of an email sending. It's done. They have 48 hours to accept or reject. If they reject, we file criminal charges immediately. I hung up and sat on my bed for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. I wasn't carrying their anger anymore. I was putting it down, but I was also putting up boundaries they could never cross again. That was forgiveness on my terms. That was compassionate accountability. That was me finally choosing myself while still leaving room for them to choose to be better. Whether they would remain to be seen. Patricia's conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and the late afternoon sun cut across the long table where my family sat on one side and I sat on the other. Patricia was at the head of the table, professional and imposing, in her navy suit, a stack of documents in front of her. My parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in the past week. My father's hair seemed greyer. My mother's hand shook as she held a tissue. Sarah sat between them, her expensive clothes replaced with something more modest, her makeup minimal. For once, she wasn't performing. Tyler wasn't there. I'd specified he shouldn't attend this meeting. This was between the adults. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began. "Ms. Thompson has drafted a comprehensive settlement agreement. You have 48 hours to review and sign, or she will proceed with criminal charges. I'm going to walk through the terms now." She slid copies of the agreement across the table. 8 pages single-spaced, every clause carefully crafted to be enforceable. "First, property ownership," Patricia said. "Ms. Thompson will be recorded as sole legal owner of the property at 45 Maple Street. This is non-negotiable and reflects both her position on the title deed and her 5 years of exclusive payments." My father opened his mouth to protest, but Patricia continued without pause. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you may continue living in the house as tenants under a 3-year lease agreement. The monthly rent will be set at 30% below market rate, approximately $1,800 per month. To Ms. Mitchell, if you continue living there, you'll be listed as a subtenant and must contribute $600 monthly." Sarah's face went pale. "I can't afford that. I don't have a job." "Then I suggest you find one," Patricia said flatly. "The lease is contingent on rent being paid on time and compliance with all other settlement terms. Miss 2 payments and the lease terminates. Miss 3 and Ms. Thompson initiates eviction proceedings." My mother was crying silently, but I kept my expression neutral. "Second, financial restitution," Patricia continued. "Miss Mitchell, you will repay the $45,000 you took from Ms. Thompson's inheritance. Payment plan is $750 per month for 60 months. If you miss 2 consecutive payments, the entire balance becomes due immediately, and Ms. Thompson can pursue collection through civil court." "That's impossible," Sarah said, her voice rising. "I told you I don't have income. How am I supposed to pay $750 a month? Additionally," Patricia said, ignoring the outburst, "the $18,000 in credit card debt you accumulated in Ms. Thompson's name will be transferred to accounts in your name within 30 days. Ms. Thompson's credit report will be corrected, and you will assume full responsibility for those debts." Sarah put her head in her hands. "Third, behavioural terms," Patricia said. "These are strongly encouraged but not legally enforceable. However, Ms. Thompson's willingness to forgo criminal prosecution is directly tied to your good faith compliance." She flipped to the next page. "All parties agree to participate in family therapy sessions once weekly for 12 months. Ms. Thompson will provide a list of qualified therapists. She will not attend these sessions, but will receive monthly progress reports from the therapist." "You're not even going to be there?" my mother asked, her voice small. "No," I said, speaking for the first time. "This therapy is for you to figure out why you did what you did and how to be better people. It's not for me to make you feel better about it." Patricia nodded and continued. "Tyler Mitchell will complete 100 hours of community service at an organisation chosen by Ms. Thompson. He will also write and read aloud formal apologies at the next extended family gathering. Ms. Thompson will provide the guest list." My father's jaw clenched. "You're going to humiliate the boy in front of everyone." He humiliated Ms. Thompson in front of everyone, Patricia replied. This is accountability, not humiliation. The apology will be truthful and take responsibility for his actions. Fourth and finally, Patricia said, the no prosecution clause. Ms. Thompson agrees not to pursue criminal charges for the inheritance, fraud, identity theft, property fraud or forgery, provided all settlement terms are met. However, she pulled out a separate document. Ms. Mitchell, you will sign a detailed confession admitting to all fraudulent activities. This confession will be notarized and held by Ms. Thompson permanently. If you violate any term of this settlement, this confession can be submitted to prosecutors as evidence. You would be waiving your Fifth Amendment rights by signing this. Sarah stared at the confession letter like it was a snake. You want me to confess in writing to crimes I might still be charged with? Only if you violate the agreement, Patricia said. Think of it as insurance. Ms. Thompson is offering you the chance to avoid prison. This ensures you don't waste that chance. The room was silent, except for the sound of pages turning as my family read through the terms. I watched their faces, shock, anger, fear, resignation, all playing across their features as they understood the scope of what I was demanding. This is insane, my father finally said. These terms are punitive. You're treating us like criminals. You are criminals, I said quietly. You committed multiple felonies. These terms are the only thing standing between you and prison. So yes, they're strict. They're supposed to be. We can't agree to this, Sarah said. It's too much. The rent, the payments, the confession, it's designed to destroy us financially. No, I said. It's designed to hold you accountable. You can meet these terms if you make different choices. If you get jobs, manage money responsibly, and actually try to be better people. But if you can't do that, then yes, there will be consequences. My mother looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Kim, please. We're your family. Can't we work something out? Something less harsh? These terms are non-negotiable, Patricia said before I could respond. You have until 5 p.m. today to sign, or Ms. Thompson proceeds with criminal charges. I have the police reports and complaint documents ready to file. The family looked at each other, and I could see the calculation happening. Prison or compliance, destruction or accountability. If we sign this, my father said slowly, what happens next? Next, you learn to live with the consequences of your actions, I said. And maybe if you actually do the work, if you actually change, we can eventually have some kind of relationship. But that's years away. Right now, this is about justice. They sat in silence, the settlement agreement trembling in their hands. They signed the agreement that Friday afternoon, their signatures shaky but legally binding. Now, 1 month later, I sat in my parents' house watching 35 relatives mill around with plates of food, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I'd arrived early with Margaret, who squeezed my hand as we walked through the door. My parents had greeted us stiffly, the word tenants hanging unspoken in the air between us. The house looked the same, but felt different now that everyone knew who actually owned it. Tyler was setting out folding chairs in the living room, part of his community service, including helping prepare for this gathering. When he saw me, he gave a small, genuine smile before returning to his task. He'd been volunteering at the food bank for 3 weeks now, and I'd heard from the coordinator that he was one of their most reliable helpers. Sarah was in the kitchen, her face pale, holding index cards with her prepared statement. She'd lost weight this past month, her expensive clothes replaced with Target basics, now that she was working as a receptionist at a dental office. The first restitution payment of $750 had cleared my account last week. At 7 p.m, my father stood in the centre of the living room and called for everyone's attention. The chatter died down as relatives found seats, curiosity and confusion evident on their faces. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his voice unsteady. We've gathered you here because there are some things that need to be said, some truths that need to be spoken. He looked at Sarah. My daughter has something she needs to share. Sarah stood the index cards trembling in her hands. She'd rehearsed this with her therapist, I knew, but standing in front of 35 relatives was different than practicing in an office. I need to confess something, she began, her voice barely audible. Someone in the back called out for her to speak up, and she took a shaky breath. I need to confess that I've treated my sister Kimberly terribly for 35 years. The room went completely silent. When our grandmother died 15 years ago, she left Kim $45,000 and a cottage. I forged Kim's signature to steal that inheritance. I used the money for my wedding and my business. Kim never knew it existed until a month ago. Gasps rippled through the room. Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Robert sat forward in his chair. I also opened credit cards in Kim's name, without her knowledge, and accumulated $18,000 in debt that damaged her credit. For the past 5 years, Kim has been paying the mortgage on this house, every single payment, while my parents and I lived here rent-free. We let her believe she was just helping out. But the truth is, she was carrying us completely. Some relatives were whispering to each other. Others stared at Sarah in shock. I watched it all with a strange detachment, like viewing a play about someone else's life. Worst of all, Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face now. I taught my son to treat Kim with disrespect and cruelty. I told him she was worthless. And when he assaulted her at a family party a month ago, hitting her 20 times, I did nothing to stop it. Several relatives gasped. Cousin Michelle was openly crying. I'm deeply, deeply sorry, Sarah finished, her voice breaking. I have no excuse for what I've done. I can only promise to do better and to make restitution for as long as it takes. She sat down abruptly, and the room erupted in hushed, shocked conversation. Tyler, my father said quietly, and the room fell silent again. My nephew stood holding a piece of paper he'd written himself. No index cards, no therapist's help, his own words. My name is Tyler, and I hurt my Aunt Kim. He read, his voice surprisingly steady. I hit her 20 times at my award party while everyone watched. I did it because my mum taught me that Aunt Kim didn't matter, that she was weak and poor and nobody important. He looked up from his paper directly at me. But I was wrong. Aunt Kim isn't weak. She's the strongest person I know. She's been taking care of all of us for years, and we treated her like garbage. I treated her like garbage. His voice cracked, but he continued. I'm sorry, Aunt Kim. I'm sorry for hitting you. I'm sorry for being mean. I'm sorry for believing bad things about you without ever trying to know the real you. And I promise I'm going to be better. He sat down, and I saw several relatives wiping their eyes. Aunt Carol was crying openly now. Uncle Robert's face had gone red. Then Uncle Robert stood. He was 72, retired from the post office, a man I'd known my entire life, but who'd never said more than pleasantries to me at family gatherings. I need to say something, he announced, his voice rough with emotion. I've watched this family treat Kimberly like dirt for 35 years. I watched her get overlooked, dismissed, and used. And I never said a damn word because I was too much of a coward to call it out. He looked directly at me. Kim, I'm ashamed. Ashamed I stayed silent. Ashamed I didn't defend you. But today I'm saying what I should have said decades ago. I'm proud of you. Proud of the woman you became despite this family, not because of it. You deserved better, and I'm sorry you didn't get it. The room was absolutely silent now. Other relatives were nodding, some looking ashamed themselves. Aunt Carol spoke up. Robert's right. We all saw it. We all knew. And we all stayed quiet. And then, as if a dam had broken, Other relatives began to speak. Cousin David, I always thought you were amazing, Kim. I just never said it out loud. Aunt Linda, I should have invited you over more, made you feel welcome in ways your own parents didn't. On and on. Validation I'd never received pouring out from people who'd watched me be erased and said nothing. I felt Margaret's hand on my shoulder steadying me as the weight of 35 years of witnessing finally found its voice. Then someone called out, Kim, do you want to say anything? And just like that, 35 faces turned to me waiting, wondering what the invisible daughter would say now that she'd finally been seen. I stood slowly, and the entire room went silent. I stood there looking at 35 faces, some filled with tears, others with shame, all of them finally seeing me after decades of looking through me as if I were glass. Thank you, I said simply. Thank you for finally saying out loud what you all saw, but never acknowledged. It matters that you witnessed it. It matters that you're admitting you stayed silent. I took a breath, gathering my thoughts. I'm not going to stand here and recount every hurt, every dismissal, every moment I was made to feel invisible. We all know what happened. The question now is what comes next. I looked at my parents, at Sarah, at Tyler. I chose not to press criminal charges because I wanted to give you the chance to change, to actually become people I could have some kind of relationship with. But I want to be clear that relationship will never be what it was. It can't be. You broke something that can't be fully repaired. My voice was steady, not angry but firm. If you do the work, the real work of becoming better people, we might eventually have something new. Not the old dynamic where I'm invisible and you're center stage. Something equal, something honest. But that's years away, and it depends entirely on your choices. I turned to address the whole room. To everyone else, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And if any of you ever see someone in your family being treated the way I was treated, I hope you will remember this moment and choose to speak up instead of staying silent. I sat down and Margaret squeezed my hand under the table. The gathering continued, but it was different now. People approached me throughout the evening, apologizing, sharing their own stories, finally seeing me as a real person instead of a convenient ghost. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. 6 months later, on my 36th birthday, I threw myself a party. A real party with my name on everything in a rented event space with big windows and string lights. Margaret arrived first, bringing a homemade cake that said, "Happy birthday, Kimberly," in bold blue frosting. My co-workers came and my book club friends and Patricia Chen with a bottle of expensive wine. The room filled with people who knew me, who valued me, who'd chosen to be in my life. And yes, my family came too. Tyler arrived with a handmade card that had clearly taken him hours. The front showed a watercolour painting of 2 figures, one tall and one short, holding hands. Inside, he'd written in careful letters, "To the strongest aunt in the world. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Love, Tyler." Sarah came with a modest gift and helped set up the catering food she'd paid for herself from her receptionist salary. She'd been making her restitution payments on time for 6 months now, and the credit card debt in my name was finally transferred to hers. My parents arrived looking older, but somehow lighter, as if the weight of their lives had been crushing them more than I'd realised. They'd been attending therapy regularly and had started volunteering at a senior centre, learning for the first time in their lives how to give without expecting something in return. Halfway through the party, my father stood and clinked his glass. The room quieted, and I saw his hand shaking slightly. "Kimberly," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to say something I should have said 35 years ago." He paused, collecting himself. "I'm proud of you. I was always proud of you. You were smart and responsible and kind even when we didn't deserve your kindness." His voice cracked, "But I didn't know how to show it without making your sister jealous. I thought if I praised you, Sarah would feel less than. So I sacrificed you to keep the peace. I made you invisible to protect her feelings, and that was wrong. That was cowardly and wrong, and I'm sorry." My mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid," she added, her voice barely above a whisper, "afraid that if I loved you both equally, Sarah would feel unloved. So I chose to hurt you instead. I chose wrong Kim. I chose wrong every day for 35 years. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to erase what they had done. But it was real, and it was honest, and it was more than I'd ever gotten before. I didn't hug them. I didn't say, 'It's okay,' because it wasn't okay. But I nodded, acknowledging their words, and that was enough for now. Later, as everyone gathered around to sing happy birthday, I looked at the faces in the room. Margaret, who taught me about boundaries and self-worth. Tyler, who'd learned to break cycles. Patricia, who'd fought for my legal rights. My co-workers and friends who'd never known the invisible version of me. And yes, my family's still broken, but trying, still damaged, but choosing to grow. As I blew out the candles, making a wish I didn't need anyone else to fulfill, I thought about the question people kept asking: did I regret the 35 years I'd lost? No. Those years taught me everything I needed to know. They taught me that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. That family isn't about blood, it's about who sees you when you're invisible. That loving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I spent my whole life trying to be seen by them. Now I only needed to see myself. And that made all the difference. The cake was chocolate, my favourite, not Sarah's. The presents were thoughtful, not generic. The songs people sang used my name, not someone else's. For the first time in my life, I had a birthday that was actually mine. 6 months later, Tyler graduated from his community service program with a certificate and a letter of recommendation. Sarah got promoted at the dental office. My parents celebrated their 40th anniversary by donating to a women's shelter instead of throwing themselves a party. And I sat in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning having a second date with a man named David, who actually listened when I talked and remembered the small things I mentioned. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Proud of you, kid." I smiled and put the phone away, returning my attention to the man across from me who was telling a story about his rescue dog and making me laugh. I was 36 years old, finally visible, finally free, finally living a life that was mine. And it was better than anything I could have imagined when I stood in that living room 6 months ago, my face burning from 20 slaps, making a choice to finally see myself clearly. I didn't need their love anymore. I'd found something better. I'd found my own. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. It means more than you know to have someone truly listen to a story about finding yourself after spending a lifetime being invisible. I want to ask you something important. Have you ever felt overlooked in your own family? Have you ever been the one who gives and gives while others just take? Have you ever wondered if standing up for yourself makes you selfish, or if setting boundaries means you're destroying your family? If any of this resonates with you, please leave a comment below. Share your story. Tell me what you're going through. You'd be amazed how many people are walking the same path, feeling the same pain, wondering if they're alone in this struggle. And here's what I've learned from my journey. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. Your feelings are valid, your pain is real, and you deserve to be seen. You deserve to take up space. You deserve a life where kindness doesn't mean self-destruction. If this story helped you in any way, if it made you feel less alone or gave you the courage to set your own boundaries, please hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what part of this story hit home for you. Your engagement helps this message reach other people who desperately need it. Remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me. And I hope you're learning to see yourself too.